"Don't eat that, sir." The words left Sheila's mouth before her body had fully committed to the decision. Her rubber-soled work shoes caught on the edge of the runner as she came around the service corner, one hand gripping the edge of her silver tray to keep it from flying, the other already raised, already pointing, already too late to take back. "Stop, please stop. Don't eat that." She was moving fast through the outer corridor of the young estate's grand dining hall, past the towering floral arrangements and the guests in their silk and their judgment, cutting a diagonal line toward the head of the table with the specific kind of desperation that only comes from watching someone walk toward the edge of something they cannot see. "Don't eat it." She was breathless by the time she reached the end of the table. "Sir, that dish, please don't eat it. Something was added to it. I saw it. I was standing right there and I saw it." Hae Young sat at the head of the table. He was not a man who moved quickly for anyone. His reputation preceded him into every room he entered, and tonight was no different. The engagement dinner of the decade. They were calling it in certain circles. A celebration of power formalizing itself. Power taking a name and a ring and a future. His chopsticks hovered over a bowl of ganjang jejang, the centerpiece dish Veronica Stalin had personally requested the estate's chef prepare. A specialty she had announced over aperitifs, chosen with love. He had not yet eaten. He looked at Sheila. Not through her, the way most people in this room had looked at her all evening. At her. Across the hall, near the far service entrance, Sheila's supervisor took a single step forward and then stopped, one hand braced against the doorframe. His face arranged itself into the particular expression of a man calculating the size of the disaster unfolding in front of him. "Sheila," his voice was a warning dressed as a name. But Sheila did not move. "She watched the kitchen. She saw you," Sheila said. Her voice shook, but it did not break. "She went back to the kitchen 20 minutes ago before the soup course. She had something in her hand when she went in and nothing when she came out, and the chef was at the far station, and nobody else was watching the garnish station, and I was. I was watching because that is my job. That is all I have ever done in this house. Watch." A murmur moved through the guests, like a cold current under warm water. Veronica Stalin rose from her chair. She wore ivory, floor-length, impeccably structured, the kind of dress that communicated not just wealth but the specific message that the woman inside it had planned everything. Her diamond engagement ring caught the chandelier light as she placed one hand on the edge of the table, and the smile she turned on Sheila was calm in the way that very dangerous things are calm. "I'm sorry." Her voice was controlled, beautiful, and absolutely Arctic. "Do you want to repeat that?" Sheila pointed toward the kitchen corridor, the garnish station. "The star anise oil glaze on the rim of that bowl. You used a dropper, silver, small, about this long. You tucked it into the inside pocket of your clutch when you finished." "I think," Veronica said, turning now toward the guests rather than Sheila, because the guests were the jury that mattered. "I think this young woman has had a very long evening." Laughter moved through the room. Careful laughter, the kind that needed permission, the kind that was waiting to see which direction the wind was blowing before it committed to a direction. "She's one of the servers," someone near the center of the room said, quietly, to nobody in particular. A woman in emerald green leaned toward her husband. These events attract all sorts of personalities. You know how it gets near the end of a shift. Someone else, closer to the service corridor, her mother used to work here. She probably grew up thinking she knew this family. Sheila heard it. She heard all of it. She had been hearing versions of it her entire life, the gentle social machinery of erasure, the way a room full of powerful people could decide, without a single spoken agreement, that a person was not quite real enough to be believed. She did not move. Hae Young had still not eaten. He was watching her with an expression she could not fully read, not anger, not amusement, something behind those two things, something older and more careful. He set his chopsticks down on the rest beside his bowl. The small sound of lacquered wood against porcelain was somehow the loudest thing in the room. "You said a dropper," he said. "Silver." "Yes, sir." "And you were at the garnish station." "I was clearing the amuse-bouche service," Sheila said. "I was 3 feet away." Veronica's jaw tightened by a fraction of a millimeter. Anyone watching her face for pleasure would have missed it. Sheila did not miss it. "Hey, young," Veronica said. "Darling, surely you are not going to sit at the head of your own engagement dinner and let a member of the wait staff." "I'm asking her a question," he said, "not you." The room went the specific quiet of a gathering that has just realized it is no longer at a party. Veronica sat back down. The movement was controlled, precise, the way someone sits when they have decided that sitting is a tactical choice rather than a surrender. She picked up her wine glass. She did not drink from it. "I know what I saw," Sheila said. She looked directly at Hae Young and not at anyone else in the room, because he was the only one in the room whose answer was going to matter in the next 4 minutes. "I have 2 years of pre-med coursework. I know what a compound dropper looks like. I know what star anise oil is used to mask. And I know that whatever she added to that glaze is not something that belongs in a bowl of food." Hae Young looked at the bowl in front of him. He looked at Veronica. He looked back at Sheila. And then, with the specific, quiet deliberateness of a man who has survived long enough in his particular world to know that pride is sometimes the most expensive thing a person owns, he picked up his chopsticks, reached into the bowl, lifted a single, small piece to his mouth. "Don't," Sheila started. He chewed once, swallowed, set the chopsticks down. "Now we wait," he said. "Now before we go any further, I have to pause right here, because something about Sheila's courage in that moment, the way she walked into a room that was designed to make her invisible and refused to disappear, it reminded me of something I want to share with our Dora'sArchives family right now. If you are watching from the United States, there may be monthly grocery benefits sitting unclaimed with your name on them, and I do not want you to leave today without checking. Scan the QR code on your screen, click the link in the description, or go directly to Dora'sArchives.com. Answer a few simple questions and find out instantly what you qualify for. And if the survey gives you any trouble at all, drop a comment below or send me an email. I will personally walk you through it. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments too. I read every single one. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now because this community is something special and I do not want you to miss what's coming. Now, let's get back to Sheila. Because in about 90 seconds, the most powerful man in the city is going to start losing his breath. And she's the only person in that room who knows exactly why. The first sign was the stillness. Not the dramatic collapse of a man overwhelmed, not yet. Just a slight change in the quality of Hae Young's attention, a sharpness around his eyes that had not been there before, the look of a man running a private inventory of his own body and finding something unexpected on the list. His second-in-command, Kenji, was at his shoulder before the first full minute had passed. He had been watching Sheila since the moment she entered the dining hall uninvited, and he was watching her now with the focused, flat expression of a man who had already made a decision and was simply waiting for the confirmation. Sheila did not look at Kenji. She was watching Hae Young's hands, the way his right hand had moved from the table surface to his knee, the way his breathing had acquired a slight, almost imperceptible hitch at the top of each inhale. You don't save a king without becoming a target. She had known that the moment the words left her mouth. She had known it before they left her mouth. She had made the decision anyway, the way you make certain decisions when the alternative is watching something irreversible happen to someone and carrying the weight of your own silence for the rest of your life. Hae Young turned his head toward her slowly. His eyes, when they found hers across the length of that table, were burning. Not dim, not afraid, burning. He said. His voice was even controlled. The voice of a man who had trained himself never to show a wound in a room full of people who would use it. Come here. The guests stared. Veronica's wine glass came down on the table with a sound like a small gunshot. Sheila walked to the head of the table. And somewhere behind the estate's kitchen double doors, in the silver-handled clutch resting on a preparation counter near the star anise, a small empty dropper caught the overhead light and glinted once, in the dark, like a secret that was already running out of time to keep itself. One more bite, and he would have been a memory. But he had only taken one. And Sheila Adams, pre-med dropout, server daughter, the woman everyone in this room had spent the evening looking through, was still standing. 3 hours before Hae-young almost died, Sheila Adams was arguing with a lemon. Not literally, but the garnish station had been set up by someone who had never actually carried a full tray through a crowded room, and the lemon wedges were cut too thick, which meant the rim presentations on the aperitif glasses were going to sit crooked, which meant Sheila was going to spend the first 40 minutes of this shift quietly fixing someone else's oversight while pretending she hadn't noticed it at all. That was the job. That had always been the job. Fix things without being seen fixing them. Maintain the illusion that the young estate ran on elegance alone, that the crystal was always clean, and the flowers always fresh, and the food always arrived at the exact right temperature by some kind of ambient grace, rather than the labor of 12 people in non-slip shoes who had been on their feet since 4 in the afternoon. She was good at invisible work. She had been doing it long enough that it required almost no conscious effort. Her hands moved through the reset, while her mind was somewhere else entirely. Running through the second semester pharmacology notes she had been reviewing on the bus ride over. Enzyme inhibitors. Competitive versus non-competitive binding. The specific way certain compounds could sit dormant in a system for hours before the right catalyst activated them. She was thinking about that, actually, when she saw it. Not the movement itself at first, the light. The young estate's kitchen ran on overhead halogens, supplemented by the warm amber task lighting above each prep station. And the combination created a very specific quality of illumination that Sheila had spent enough shifts under to know by feel. So when a different light appeared, a brief, oily shimmer near the sauce finishing station, the kind of iridescence that does not come from any cooking ingredient she had ever worked around, her body registered it before her brain had finished processing the information. Her hands went still on the lemon wedges. Veronica Stalin was standing at the far end of the garnish corridor. She had come back from the dining hall 6 minutes ago. Sheila had noticed because noticing things was the entire architecture of her survival in rooms like this one. Who was moving where? Who was watching what? Which guests were the kind of drunk that turned generous, and which were the kind that turned cruel? She had catalogued Veronica's return the way she catalogued everything. Automatically, without attachment, filed under irrelevant until proven otherwise. It was no longer irrelevant. Veronica's back was to the room. Her posture was the posture of a woman selecting a canapé or inspecting a garnish, the studied casualness of someone performing nonchalance for an audience they were pretending not to have. Her right hand moved from the inside pocket of her ivory clutch to the rim of the ganjang jejang bowl in a gesture so brief and so fluid that under any other lighting condition, in any other level of attention, it would have registered as nothing at all. But Sheila saw the dropper. Silver, the length of a thumb. The single, oily bead it released caught the halogen overhead for just a fraction of a second before it vanished into the dark glaze on the bowl's edge, and the light it made as it disappeared was the same shimmer Sheila had caught from across the station. Not a cooking ingredient, not a finishing oil, something with a refractive index that didn't belong in food. The spoon didn't just hit the bowl. It sounded like a bell for a fight I wasn't ready for. Veronica replaced the dropper, smoothed the front of her dress with both hands, turned from the station with a small, private smile, and walked back toward the dining hall doors without looking once in Sheila's direction. Because Sheila was the help. The help didn't see things. For 11 seconds, Sheila did not move. She stood at the garnish station with a lemon wedge in her hand and her pharmacology notes dissolving at the back of her mind, replaced by something faster and colder and considerably less academic. She ran the calculation the way she had been trained to run it, the way 2 years of pre-med had taught her to approach a symptom before she had a diagnosis. Rule out the benign first, work toward the lethal. Maybe it was a supplement. Bespoke nutrition was not unheard of among the wealthy. She had worked events where guests brought their own enzyme drops, their own collagen additions, their own imported mineral compounds. Possible. Except Veronica had looked around first. That was the detail that closed the benign column entirely. People who add harmless things to their fiancé's food do not perform a perimeter check before they do it. They do not move with that specific economy of motion. Clutch in, drop her out, drop her in, clutch closed. That belongs to someone who has rehearsed the sequence. The bowl was already on the serving cart. In approximately 4 minutes, based on the packing of the courses she had been tracking all evening, it would be in front of Hae Young. Sheila set the lemon wedge down. I wasn't a hero. I was just a girl who couldn't watch a man die. She went. The dining hall doors were heavy, and she came through them faster than any server was supposed to move through a room full of crystal and candlelight, and she felt the shift in the atmosphere immediately. The way 27 people registered a disruption in the choreography without yet knowing what it meant. She registered Kenji at his post near the east wall. She registered the serving cart, already in motion, being wheeled toward the head of the table by a colleague who had no idea what he was carrying. She registered Hae Young at the end of that long, white-lined table, unhurried, sovereign, unreachable in the way that men who have survived long enough in dangerous rooms develop as a kind of permanent posture. Don't eat that, sir. The words landed in the room, and the room changed. Not dramatically, not yet. The music didn't stop. The candles kept burning. But a certain quality of attention swung in her direction the way attention does when something has violated an unspoken contract, and Sheila felt it land on her skin like a temperature change. She was already moving toward the head of the table. Her tray was still in her left hand by reflex. Her right hand was pointing. Stop, please don't eat it. That dish, something was added to it. I was at the garnish station. I saw it happen. Please, sir, you cannot eat that. The serving cart stopped. Hae Young looked at her. Across the room, near the service entrance, her supervisor took the kind of breath that precedes an intervention that he already knew he was too late to prevent. The guests had gone from ambient social murmur to the very specific silence of people who have scented a scene and are deciding whether to be horrified or entertained. And then Veronica stood up. She rose from her chair the way architecture rises, with the implication that it was always going to be exactly this height and this presence, and there was never any other possibility. The diamond on her left hand fractured the chandelier light into small, cold points as she placed one hand on the edge of the table and turned the full weight of her attention onto Sheila. Veronica didn't flinch when I screamed. She just adjusted her pearls. Her voice, when it came, was a thing of craftsmanship. Not loud, not shrill. The kind of control that takes years to build, the kind that communicates without needing to say it directly, that only unreasonable people raise theirs. I'm going to assume, Veronica said, that there has been some kind of misunderstanding, because I cannot imagine that a member of the serving staff has just run into the middle of our engagement dinner to make this kind of accusation. I watched you go back into the kitchen, Sheila said. You used a dropper, silver, small. You added something to the glaze on that bowl and you looked around the room first to make sure no one was watching. A man near the center of the table leaned toward his companion and said something too low to hear. His companion nodded. Near the window, a woman in green set her wine glass down with an expression that managed to communicate both concern and boredom simultaneously. Her mother works here, someone said. Used to anyway. She grew up around this estate. You know how these attachments form. Sheila heard it. She cataloged it the way she cataloged everything, quickly, without letting it land anywhere it could do damage. She had been hearing the particular sound of a room, deciding she didn't count for long enough that it no longer had the power to move her off the mark. It was background noise. It was the sound of people reaching for the most comfortable explanation, the one that required the least rearrangement of their world. She kept her eyes on Hae Young. He had not looked away from her. Sir, she said, I have 2 years of pre-med, enzyme inhibitors, compound solubility in lipid-based sauces. What I saw in that dropper had a refractive index that does not belong in food. I cannot tell you exactly what it was from across a kitchen, but I can tell you that it was not an ingredient. Hae Young said nothing for a moment. He had the quality of stillness that belongs to people who have learned to treat silence as a tool rather than a void. Then, quietly, you were at the garnish station. 3 feet from the finishing counter. Yes, sir. Veronica's hand tightened once on the edge of the table. Released. Ethan, she began. His name is Young, Sheila said, and did not know, until the words were already out, that she was going to say them. The room had a different quality of quiet. Veronica looked at her for the first time the way one looks at something that has abruptly reclassified itself. Not through her. At her. The same inventory Sheila had been running on rooms her entire professional life, turned now in her direction with a precision that felt less like attention and more like targeting. The smile that followed was small and almost beautiful, and did not reach anything above her cheekbones. Hey, Young, she said, with careful softness. Are you going to let her keep talking? He picked up his chopsticks. No, Sheila said, the word arriving from somewhere below rational thought, from the part of her that had spent 2 years learning exactly what certain compounds do to a human body at the cellular level, from the part that had sat beside her mother in a hospital room, and learned, in the most irreversible way possible, the cost of being too late. He lifted one piece from the bowl. She took a step forward. He ate it. The chopsticks went down with a sound that was almost gentle. The room exhaled. Veronica settled back into her chair with the measured grace of someone who has just watched a hand play out exactly as calculated. And Sheila stood at the head of that table, in her non-slip shoes, in her server's uniform, in the specific and total visibility of someone the room had spent the whole evening refusing to see, and watched Young's right hand move quietly from the tablecloth to his knee. Now we wait, he said. She heard the words. She was already counting. Because she knew, from the refractive shimmer, from the lipid-soluble base, from 2 years of pharmacology that debt had stolen from her, she knew what a 2-stage compound needed to activate. And the second stage wasn't in the bowl. It was already in his system. It had been there for weeks. The first 90 seconds were deceptive. That was the nature of a lipid-soluble compound with a delayed activation mechanism. It did not announce itself. It did not rush. It moved through the bloodstream with the patience of something that had been engineered specifically to avoid suspicion, and the man sitting at the head of that table was doing exactly what it needed him to do, which was nothing. Which was sit still and breathe normally, and give the room every reason to believe that the server in the non-slip shoes had lost her mind, publicly and spectacularly, and would be escorted out before the next course arrived. Sheila was counting. Not the seconds exactly, she didn't have a number, couldn't have one without knowing the specific compound or the precise concentration in that dropper, but she had the shape of it. Lipid-soluble agents absorbed through the gastric lining moved at a rate determined by stomach acidity and lipid content of the meal already consumed. And Young had been drinking a dry red wine for the past hour, which meant his gastric pH was already shifted, which meant the absorption curve was steeper than average, which meant 90 seconds. Maybe less. She was watching his hands. The right one, still resting on his knee under the tablecloth where most people in the room couldn't see it, had developed a very slight tremor in the last 20 seconds. Not a shake. Not yet. A hum, almost, the kind of involuntary micro-movement that the nervous system produces when it is receiving a signal it does not know how to categorize. His left hand, above the table and visible to the room, was completely still. He was maintaining that with effort. She could see the effort. In the Mafia, a cough is as loud as a gunshot. He knew something was happening. He was simply refusing to let the room know he knew. Veronica had reseated herself with the careful composure of a woman who had decided the best performance available to her now was dignified patience. The wounded fiancé enduring a bizarre and unwarranted disruption, waiting for the adults in the room to restore order. She had picked up her wine glass again. She held it without drinking, which Sheila noted and filed. 2 of the estate's security detail had materialized at Sheila's peripheral vision, not touching her yet, but positioned in the specific way that communicated touch was imminent and contingent only on a signal from someone further up the chain. Kenji was already moving toward the head of the table. His attention split between Young and Sheila, with the practiced vigilance of a man whose entire professional identity was built around not being surprised twice. He was going to be surprised. "Sir," Sheila kept her voice level and directed it only at Young, because the room no longer mattered and Veronica no longer mattered, and the social machinery grinding toward her removal no longer mattered. "You need to tell me if you feel warmth moving up from your sternum. That's the first marker. If you feel it, I need you to say so right now." A woman near the second table made a sound of sharp offense. The foundation donor shook his silver head. Someone near the service corridor laughed, not with cruelty exactly, but with the reflexive discomfort of a person who does not know what else to do with what they are witnessing. Young did not laugh. He turned his head toward her with a deliberateness that cost him something. She could see it cost him something, and his eyes, when they found hers, were not the eyes of a man at a dinner party. His eyes didn't dim. They burned with a terrifying realization. He knew. Not the chemistry of it, not the mechanism, or the compound class, or the activation pathway, but the knowledge that lives below all of that, the animal knowledge, the knowledge that arrives in the body before the brain has assembled the language for it. He knew that what was moving through him right now was not wine, and not nerves, and not the ambient heat of a crowded room. He knew she had been right. The tremor in his right hand moved up his forearm. It happened fast, the way the truly irreversible things always happen, not with drama at first, but with a quiet wrongness that the body around it takes a moment to process. Young's left hand, the one above the table, the one he had been holding still by force of will, came down against the tablecloth with a sound that was nothing like a deliberate gesture. A glass moved. Silverware shifted. The small disturbance traveled down the length of the table like information passing through a wire, and 27 people looked toward the head of the table at the same moment. Kenji was there in 4 steps. "Sir," his voice was low and stripped of everything except function. "Sir, look at me." Young was looking at Sheila. His breathing had changed. She could see it in his shoulders. The way each inhale had acquired a slight bracing quality, the body recruiting secondary muscles to compensate for something the primary ones were no longer doing efficiently. His color had shifted in the candlelight, not dramatically, not the gray of a man in cardiac arrest. Something subtler and in some ways more alarming, the specific pallor of a system working very hard to maintain a surface that was no longer representative of what was happening underneath it. He said. It was one word, and it held about 6 different things inside it, and Sheila understood all of them. "I'm here," she said. She stepped forward. Kenji's hand came up between them like a wall. "Do not come closer," Kenji said. She ignored him. Not recklessly. She understood exactly what Kenji was and what he was capable of, and she was not under any illusion that ignoring him was without consequence. But the consequence of not ignoring him was the one she could not afford right now. "His airway is going to start narrowing in the next 4 to 6 minutes, she said, pitching her voice for Kenji specifically because Kenji was the one who was going to make the next decision in this room. That's what this compound does. It doesn't announce itself. It builds. By the time it's visible to everyone in this room, it will already be significantly advanced. And if you do not let me get close enough to assess him right now, you are going to spend the next 20 minutes watching him deteriorate while you wait for an ambulance that may or may not arrive with the right treatment protocol." Kenji stared at her. The room, meanwhile, was rearranging itself around a new understanding. Because Young had just coughed. One cough, controlled, brief, the kind a man produces when he is trying to pass something off as nothing. But in a room full of people who understood, on an instinctive level, what it meant when the most powerful man in the city showed physical vulnerability in public, that single cough landed like a detonation. Someone stood up, then someone else. A chair scraped back. A woman near the window said something sharp in a language Sheila didn't recognize, and her companion responded, and suddenly the perimeter of the room was dissolving. Guests moving toward exits or toward each other, or toward the head of the table with the specific purposeless urgency of people who want to be seen responding to a crisis, without having any idea what the crisis actually requires. Veronica had not moved. Sheila clocked that in the half-second she had available to clock anything beyond Young's breathing. Veronica Stalin, at the moment the room broke open, sat in her chair with her wine glass held at a precise 45-degree angle and watched the chaos with the particular quality of attention that belongs to someone observing an outcome rather than experiencing a surprise. She already knew the timeline. Of course she did. The guards grabbed her from behind. Both arms, simultaneously, the professional grip of men trained to neutralize a threat before it finishes becoming one. And Sheila had approximately 2 seconds of forward momentum before her feet left the floor entirely, and she was being moved backward through the crowd with a speed and efficiency that communicated very clearly that her preferences on the matter were not a variable anyone was tracking. The guards grabbed me like I was the one holding the vial. Sir, she got one more word out before a hand closed around her upper arm hard enough to cut off the sentence. Young. His name. That was all she managed before the crowd closed between them, and she was at the edge of the dining hall, and then through the service door, and then in the corridor with the overhead fluorescents, and the sound of the gala behind her changing pitch, changing urgency. The low social murmur fully collapsed now into something that had edges and volume. Let go of me, she said. The guard on her left said nothing. The one on her right said, stop moving. He needs a bronchodilator and something to slow the absorption. If you have a medical kit on this property and it has activated charcoal, that buys time. But somebody needs to be administering it right now, and I am the only person in that building who knows enough to. Stop talking, the right one said. She stopped talking because talking was not going to be the tool that got her back through that door, and she needed to think about what was. She catalogued quickly. 2 guards, both larger, corridor with no lateral exits for another 40 feet, service exit at the far end, no leverage, no allies, no credential that this particular context was going to recognize. She had her voice, and she had what she knew. The latter was the only one with any real power here. Through the closed door behind her, she heard the sound of the gala completing its transformation from celebration to crisis. She heard Kenji's voice, authoritative and controlled, directing people away from the table. She heard a woman crying. She heard, underneath all of it, the sound she had been dreading since the moment she watched Young's shoulders change. A hoarse, labored quality to someone's breathing that traveled through a closed hardwood door and a crowded room and 40 feet of corridor, and found her anyway. His airway was narrowing. She had estimated 4 to 6 minutes. She had spent at least 2 of them being removed from the room. The guard on her right was speaking into an earpiece. His voice was low and clipped, and she caught enough of it to understand that someone further up the chain was being briefed, that a decision was being made about her somewhere she couldn't access, that she was currently classified as threat or liability or both, and that classification was going to determine what happened to her in the next several minutes. She needed to reclassify herself. She needed to become the only person on this property who knew something nobody else did. Which, as it turned out, was not a performance. It was simply the truth. Listen to me, she said to the guard on her right, because he was the one on the earpiece, and the earpiece meant he had a line to Kenji. I know what compound was used. I know its activation mechanism. I know what your medical team is going to try first, and I know why it won't work. You have approximately 3 minutes before his airway reaches critical narrowing, and whatever you have in your estate kit is not calibrated for a 2-stage lipid-soluble agent. The antidote isn't standard. You cannot walk into a pharmacy and pull it off the shelf. The guard on the earpiece went still. Not the stillness of a man unconvinced. The stillness of a man relaying something he was not sure he believed, but could not afford to discard. She heard Kenji's voice change through the earpiece. Couldn't make out the words. Didn't need to. The guard's grip on her arm shifted, not releasing, not yet, but changing in quality from containment to something closer to escorting. One chance, he said. She was already moving toward the door. Behind it, Young was still fighting to breathe. Veronica was still sitting in her chair. And somewhere in the estate's kitchen, on the garnish station counter, A small silver dropper sat in the dark next to a bowl of star anise and waited for someone to find it before the people who needed it to disappear sent someone back to make sure it did. The basement of the young estate smelled like cold concrete and old money, which was its own specific combination. The kind of place that had been built to store things that needed to stay hidden, whether that was wine or information or people who had become inconvenient. Sheila had been in the service corridors of this estate for 3 shifts, and she had never been below the ground floor. She filed that away, the same way she filed everything, not with panic, but with the precise attention of a person who understood that details were the only currency she had ever reliably possessed. There was 1 table, 2 chairs, a single overhead fixture that produced the flat, unforgiving light of a room designed for clarity rather than comfort. Someone had placed a glass of water on the table, and she understood, with the instincts of a woman who had spent years reading rooms built by people with more power than her, that the water was not hospitality. It was an observation tool. Whether she drank it, how quickly, how her hands moved when she reached for it, all of it was data for the man sitting across from her. Kenji did not touch his own water. He sat with his hands flat on the table and looked at her with the expression of a man running probability calculations and not particularly liking the results. He was younger than she had initially registered in the chaos of the dining hall, mid-30s, maybe, with the particular kind of face that had been trained into blankness so thoroughly that the blankness itself had become the expression. His jacket was still immaculate. In the time between the dining hall and this room, Hae Young had been moved, the guests had been managed, the estate had been locked down, and Kenji had not loosened his tie by a single centimeter. That told her something. He was the kind of person who maintained structure when everything else was dissolving, because structure was the mechanism by which he processed the world. Which meant the approach most likely to work with him was not emotion, and not appeal, and not the kind of desperate bargaining that the situation might appear to call for. She needed to give him a framework he could use. They expected me to beg. I gave them a diagnosis instead. "Tell me what you saw," Kenji said. "From the beginning, everything." So she told him. Not the way a frightened person tells a story, fractured, recursive, looping back to emotional centers, but the way she had been trained to present a clinical observation. Chronological, specific, stripped of inference where inference wasn't earned by evidence and flagged clearly where it was. The time she arrived at the garnish station, the ambient lighting conditions and why they mattered, the precise duration of Veronica's return to the kitchen, the movement of the hand from the clutch to the bowl's rim, the refractive quality of the compound in the dropper. Kenji listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Then, you said refractive, you mean it caught the light?" "I mean it had an optical property inconsistent with any finishing oil or culinary compound I've encountered in 3 years of working events. Refractive index is a measurable characteristic. What I saw was not olive oil. It was not a flavor concentrate. Its behavior in light was wrong." "You're a server." "I was a pre-med student," Sheila said, "for 2 years, until I wasn't." Kenji looked at her with the first modulation of expression she had seen from him, not softness exactly, but a fractional recalibration. He had come in here expecting a particular kind of conversation, and she was not having that conversation. Good, she thought, stay off balance. Off balance people listen differently. Upstairs, through the concrete ceiling, she could hear movement. Not the ambient movement of a functioning estate, the purposeful, directional movement of people responding to a crisis with the knowledge that time was a variable they were losing. Someone was running. A door closed hard. A voice gave a short instruction that she couldn't make out through the concrete, but could feel in the frequency of it. Hae Young's condition was worsening. She had known it would be. She had been counting time since the dining hall, tracking the compound's progression against everything she knew about lipid-soluble agents and delayed activation mechanisms, and the math was not generous. The estate had a medical team. She had seen the first responder kit near the East Corridor on her second shift, but standard first responder protocols for suspected poisoning were going to be worse than useless here. They were going to be actively counterproductive, because the standard treatment assumption for acute poisoning was single-stage absorption, and what was in Young's bloodstream was operating on a two-stage mechanism. If they administered the wrong binding agent, they would accelerate the second stage rather than interrupt it. She needed to be upstairs. She needed to be upstairs approximately 15 minutes ago. "Sir," she said, "I understand why I'm in this room. I understand the protocol, and I'm not asking you to violate it without cause. But I need you to understand that whatever your medical team is doing right now, they are working with an incomplete picture, and incomplete treatment of a two-stage compound can trigger the secondary release before the body is ready to." "How do you know it's two-stage?" Kenji said. "Because single-stage compounds don't behave the way he was behaving." She leaned forward slightly. The progression was wrong for a contact toxin or a simple gastric irritant. He ate one small piece and his airway started narrowing within 90 seconds, but his cognition was still fully intact at the 4-minute mark. That's not a single agent. That's a primer and a catalyst. The primer was in the bowl. The catalyst is something he's already been exposed to. Something that's been building in his system long enough to be waiting for exactly this trigger. Kenji was very still. She had his full attention now in a way that was different from before. Not the attention of a man managing a situation. The attention of a man confronting a possibility he had not allowed himself to fully form until this moment. His coffee, she said quietly. His daily routine. Anything he consumes consistently enough that it would go unnoticed. The catalyst would need to be something with a long half-life and low acute toxicity. Something that accumulates over weeks without producing symptoms significant enough to flag. Someone with access to his daily consumption has been building the second stage of this in his system, and Veronica's compound tonight was designed to trigger it. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. "He's been sick," Kenji said, "not sick. Tired, headaches, we thought." "You thought it was stress," Sheila said. "It was meant to look like stress." She asked for a silver coin and got a look instead. "A real one," she said. "Sterling, not plated, or a piece of silver flatware from upstairs, anything with a high enough silver content. And I need the wine glass from his place setting. The one he was drinking from before the soup course arrived. If your team hasn't cleared that table yet, that glass is evidence." "What are you going to do with it?" Kenji said. "Show you something," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he stood up and went to the door and said something to the guard outside that she couldn't hear. He came back and sat down, and they waited in the particular silence of two people who have reached the edge of what words can accomplish and are waiting for evidence to take over. It took 4 minutes. The guard returned with a sterling fish fork and a wine glass sealed in a cloth napkin, which told Sheila that Kenji had the instincts to preserve the integrity of what she was asking for even without knowing why. And she filed that in the column of things that made him useful rather than simply obstructive. She took the fork, took the wine glass, tilted the glass and touched the tines of the fork to the interior rim where the residue of the wine had dried in a thin line just above the bowl. She held it there. Kenji watched. The silver turned black. Not slowly, not ambiguously. In the time it took Kenji to draw a single breath, the tines of the sterling fork went from their natural pale luster to a flat, definitive tarnish at the point of contact with the wine residue. The specific sulfurous reaction of silver meeting a compound that had no legitimate place in a Bordeaux. For the first time since she had entered this room, Kenji looked afraid. He covered it in under 2 seconds. The professional architecture of his expression reassembled itself with impressive efficiency. But she had seen it, the fractional widening, the sharp inhale that didn't quite complete itself, the microscopic forward lean of a man whose certainties have just been rearranged without his permission. The silver turned black, and for the first time, Kenji looked afraid. "That's the catalyst compound," Sheila said, "or a component of it. It's sulfur-reactive, which narrows the class significantly. We're looking at a thiol-based agent or a disulfide compound, something designed to bind to the hemoglobin and reduce oxygen uptake at the cellular level. That's why his airway feels like it's narrowing even if the physical structure is intact. He's not being constricted. He's being suffocated from the inside. Kenji stood up so fast the chair moved. She stood with him. "I'm not a witness anymore," she said. "I'm his only chance at a heartbeat." He looked at her. The calculation behind his eyes was visible now in a way it hadn't been before, not exposed, exactly, but no longer fully insulated. He was a man recalibrating every assumption he had walked into this room with, doing it at speed, and arriving somewhere he had not anticipated. "What do you need?" he said. "Access to the kitchen," she said immediately. "Specifically the dry storage and the refrigeration unit. Activated charcoal if your kit has it, but don't administer it yet. Not until I know the exact compound class, because the wrong binding agent makes this significantly worse. And I need to know what he drinks every morning. Coffee, tea, supplements, anything consistent. I need a list and I need it in the next 3 minutes." Kenji moved to the door, stopped, turned back. "If you're wrong," he said, "if this is something other than what you're saying it is." "Then I'm wrong," Sheila said, "and you lose nothing except the time it takes to find out. But if I'm right and you keep me in this room, you lose him." The pause that followed was the length of a man's entire professional identity being weighed against a possibility he couldn't afford to dismiss. He opened the door. The corridor beyond it was lit and cold and smelled of something antiseptic that was moving in from the direction of the stairs, which meant the medical team was already working, which meant the clock she had been running since the dining hall was further along than she wanted it to be. She went through the door. The guard fell beside her without instruction, which meant Kenji had told him to facilitate rather than contain. And that was the sliver she had needed, not trust, not exoneration, not belief in the full architecture of what she was telling him, just enough movement to get her to the next position. She took the stairs 2 at a time. Behind her, she heard Kenji on his phone, heard him say, in a voice stripped down to pure function, "Nobody touches the coffee supply until I say so." Good, she thought. But at the top of the stairs, when the door to the upper corridor opened and she got her first clear view of the room where Young had been moved, the medical team's equipment already deployed around him, she saw something that reorganized everything she thought she knew about the timeline. On the side table beside him, placed there by someone with access to this room, was a small ceramic cup. Steam still rising from it. His morning coffee, except it was 11:30 at night. Someone had brought it up during the chaos. Someone who knew exactly what was in it. Someone who was still inside this estate. The cup was still warm. Sheila stood in the doorway of the holding room and looked at it, and did not touch it, and did not move for exactly 3 seconds, which was the amount of time her brain needed to finish processing what her eyes were already telling her. Steam. Rising. Slow and thin and completely ordinary looking, the way the most dangerous things always managed to look ordinary when they needed to. Someone had been in this room in the last 10 minutes. While the estate was locked, while the perimeter was theoretically controlled, while every person without a staff credential or a security clearance was confined to the main hall under Kenji's direct instruction. Which meant the person who placed that cup was not a guest. She turned and found Kenji 2 steps behind her, and she pointed at the cup without speaking, because some information is better delivered without language, without the noise of explanation, with just the clean vector of a finger and a direction and the quality of stillness in the person doing the pointing. Kenji looked at the cup, looked at the steam, looked at Sheila. His jaw tightened by a single millimeter. "Don't let anyone touch it," she said quietly. "Bag it if you have something to bag it in. And you need to know that whoever brought it up here during a lockdown either has a credential your system recognizes or knows this building well enough to move through it without one." He was already on his radio. She moved past him toward Young. He was conscious. That was the first thing, and it was more than she had allowed herself to expect on the stairs. Conscious and upright against the headboard, his jacket removed, his collar open, a blood pressure cuff on his left arm that one of the medical team's responders was reading with an expression that communicated professional neutrality over genuine concern. His color was still wrong. The pallor she had clocked in the dining hall had deepened slightly. The particular gray undertone of a system operating on reduced oxygen efficiency, and his breathing was audible in the way that healthy breathing is not. But his eyes, when they found her in the doorway, were the same eyes from the dining hall. Not dim, burning. She crossed to him, pulled the responder's wrist report toward her without asking permission, and scanned the numbers. Oxygen saturation 89%, heart rate elevated. Blood pressure was lower than she wanted. "What did you give him?" she said to the responder. "Activated charcoal suspension," he said. "Standard protocol for—" "You need to stop," she said. Not harshly. She didn't have time for the friction that harshness would generate. Clearly, with the specific authority of someone who knows that authority is the only available alternative to wasted minutes. The compound in his system is thiol-based. Activated charcoal doesn't bind efficiently to thiol-class agents, and at the concentration we're dealing with it may be accelerating gastric motility in a way that moves the second-stage catalyst faster than it would have moved on its own. No more charcoal. No epinephrine, no vasopressors, nothing that elevates his heart rate. What I need is N-acetylcysteine if your kit carries it, and if it doesn't, I need access to the kitchen right now. The responder looked at Kenji. Kenji nodded once. The responder stepped back. Young was watching her with that burning quality that she was beginning to understand was simply his resting register. Not hostility, not suspicion, but the specific alertness of a man who had survived in his world by never fully switching it off. "You know what's in me," he said. His voice was rougher than it had been in the dining hall. The words cost slightly more effort. "I know the class of compound," she said. "I'm working on the specific agent. How do you feel right now? Describe it precisely, not generally." "Like breathing through a wet cloth," he said. "My hands are numb past the second knuckle. There's pressure behind my sternum that moves when I change position." She processed that. The distal numbness suggested peripheral vasoconstriction, which meant the compound was further along than the oxygen saturation numbers indicated. The positional chest pressure was consistent with fluid beginning to accumulate in the pericardial space. Not critical yet, moving toward critical. She needed the kitchen. She needed it now. And then every light in the estate went out. Not a flicker, not the gradual dimming of a circuit fault. One moment the room was fully lit, and the next it was the specific absolute dark of a building that has had its power cut at the source, deliberately, by someone who knew where the source was. In the Mafia, a cough is as loud as a gunshot. A building going dark is a declaration of war. Sheila did not move. Kenji's radio erupted in overlapping voices, and she stood in the darkness and listened to the shape of the information coming through it. The way she had learned to extract signal from noise in crowded kitchens and loud dining halls and hospital waiting rooms, where 4 different conversations were happening at once, and only one of them contained what you actually needed. Perimeter east. That was the first clear phrase. Then, multiple, at least 4, came over the wall at the service gate. Kenji's voice cut through the radio traffic with the precision of someone who had run drills for exactly this scenario and was now discovering that the drill had not fully accounted for the specific texture of the real thing. Hold the main hall. Do not engage in the corridor. Get him out. Get him out. That was her. That was the instruction resolving into a task that had a specific physical shape, which was a man who could not breathe correctly, a building she knew better than anyone currently in it, and a set of tunnels that had been built for a category of person that the young estate's architects had never imagined would be its most critical asset. The tunnels are for the help, but tonight they're for the king. She found Young's arm in the dark by memory and position rather than sight, which was its own kind of information about how thoroughly she had cataloged this room in the 30 seconds she had been standing in it. He was already moving, already pushing off the headboard, already attempting to stand with the specific stubbornness of a man whose pride was apparently more robust than his oxygen saturation. She got her shoulder under his arm before his legs had finished deciding whether they were going to cooperate. He was heavier than he looked, Not in a way that was unexpected, broad-shouldered, dense in the way of someone whose body had been maintained as a professional tool, but in the way of a man who was currently operating at reduced capacity and compensating by putting more weight than he intended onto the nearest available structure. He leaned on me. His weight is the heaviest truth I've ever carried. Not because of the physical mass of it, though that was real enough. Because of what it meant. Because this man, the Dragon of the North, the architect of an empire that moved the city's blood through its ports and its politics, was currently dependent on the girl everyone in his dining room had spent the evening refusing to see. And he knew it. She could feel in the quality of how he carried himself against her that he knew it completely, and was neither pretending otherwise nor performing gratitude about it. He was simply allowing it to be true, with the pragmatic honesty of a person who has learned that surviving requires occasionally setting down the performance of invulnerability. She respected that more than she expected to. "Move with me," she said. "Don't try to carry your own weight yet. Let me set the pace. There's a service door 12 feet to our left and a corridor behind it that your security detail has never been briefed on because it predates the current estate management by 40 years. "How do you know that?" he said. His voice was controlled, but the effort in it was more audible now, the wet cloth quality she had described having advanced in the 3 minutes since he mentioned it. "Because," she said, "I've run every shift on this property from those corridors. I know where every door is and what's behind it and how long it takes to move between any 2 points in this building without being seen. That's what invisible people know. We know the infrastructure." He said nothing to that. She took it as an agreement and moved. The service door opened on a handle she found by muscle memory alone, and the air beyond it was the particular cold of a space that has no heating allocation. The tunnels ran between the estate's outer walls and its interior structure, designed originally for coal delivery, and then for linen transport, and then for the general movement of labor that the estate's owners preferred not to encounter in their daily circulation. They were narrow. The ceiling was low enough that Hae Young had to adjust his posture, which cost him something, and she felt the adjustment in the way his weight redistributed against her shoulder. We aren't running from the law, she thought. We're running from his own family. Not family in the blood sense, but in the operational sense, in the sense of the people who had been inside this building, inside his inner circle, inside his daily routine long enough to know what he drank every morning and how to build something lethal into it so gradually that it looked like fatigue. Someone in his organization had been preparing this for weeks. Someone who had access to his kitchen, his calendar, his coffee. Someone who had known that Veronica's move was coming and had been laying the groundwork for it without Veronica knowing they were running a parallel operation. Or, more alarmingly, with Veronica knowing exactly what they were doing and incorporating it into the plan. The mole wasn't Veronica's subordinate. The mole was the infrastructure. She filed that and kept moving because the tunnel had a branch point in approximately 40 feet, and she needed to take the left fork, which ran beneath the east garden and came up through the groundskeeper's utility building at the property's outer edge, which would put them outside the perimeter that Veronica's team had just breached from the east wall, meaning they would emerge behind the incursion rather than in front of it. 30 feet into the tunnel, Hae Young stopped. Not because he chose to. His legs simply made a different decision than his intentions. She caught him, both hands repositioning fast, getting her weight low and under his center of gravity, the way her anatomy lab professor had demonstrated for patient transfer, leverage over strength, posture over force. He said. "I have you," she said. "I know," he said. "That's what I'm saying." She didn't have a response to that, so she got his arm back over her shoulder and kept moving. 20 feet from the branch point, she heard something that reorganized her route entirely. Footsteps in the tunnel ahead. Not from the branch, from the main passage, moving toward them with the specific even rhythm of someone who was not lost, not exploring, not stumbling through a space they didn't know. Someone was in the tunnels. Someone who knew the infrastructure. Someone who had worked this estate long enough to know that the left fork came out at the utility building. Long enough to know that if you were extracting someone from this property under pressure, that was exactly the route you would take. Sheila stopped. Young went still beside her with an immediacy that told her his situational awareness, even at reduced capacity, was faster than most people's at full function. The footsteps were 20 feet away and closing. She counted the lateral doors she had passed. 3, which meant the nearest one opened into the wine cellar's secondary storage, locked from the outside, but she knew the mechanism, had used it twice on inventory shifts, knew that the latch had a wear pattern on the left side that responded to upward pressure rather than direct pull. She found the door in the dark, by the cold of the iron handle. Applied pressure, left side, upward. The latch released. She pulled Young through and closed it behind them with 3 seconds to spare before the footsteps reached the point where they had been standing. The space beyond the door was the size of a large closet and smelled of cork and stone and the specific mineral cold of things that have been kept underground for a long time. No light, no sound except their breathing and the footsteps passing on the other side of the door. She felt Young's breathing against her shoulder, labored, deliberate, the breathing of a man rationing effort. She needed the kitchen. She needed N-acetylcysteine or the components to approximate it. She needed 10 minutes and a heat source and the dry storage cabinet on the kitchen's north wall where she had cataloged, across 3 shifts, exactly which compounds were present in the spice and supplement stores. What she had was a wine cellar and a locked door, and a man running out of oxygen efficiency and footsteps on the other side of a wall that belonged to someone who should not have known to look here. The footsteps stopped, directly outside the door. Sometimes the help you never expected is the help that changes everything. And that is exactly what I want this to be for someone in our community today. This is available to United States citizens only, and if groceries have been weighing on your budget, you may already qualify for monthly benefits right now. Here is how to find out. Scan the QR code on your screen, click the link in the description, or go to Dora'sArchives.com. Answer a few simple questions, get instantly matched with benefits you qualify for, and start receiving monthly funds for groceries and essentials. If you run into any trouble with the survey, please reach out to me in the comments or send me an email. I genuinely want to help you get this. Don't put it off. Check today while this is still available. Let's continue. The footsteps stopped, and then a voice came through the door, low and deliberate and speaking in Korean, which Sheila did not understand. But Young's entire body changed beside her in the dark in a way that communicated something more specific than recognition. Relief, and then, immediately after the relief, something harder. He said one word back through the door, one syllable, and the door opened from the outside. The man who stood in the tunnel beyond it was older than Sheila expected, late 60s, slight, with the kind of face that had been weathered by something more specific than age. He wore a staff uniform. Not the serving staff's black and white that Sheila had spent the evening in, but the groundskeeper's dark green, which meant he had been on the property since before the gala started, and had remained unremarkable throughout everything that followed because the groundskeeper is, in the taxonomy of estate invisibility, even further down than the serving staff. He looked at Sheila with an expression that held no surprise whatsoever. Then he looked at Young, and the expression changed into something that had no clean name. The face of a person looking at a consequence they had been trying to prevent and had not prevented in time. He said something in Korean, long, rapid, his eyes moving between Young's face and his hands with the specific attention of someone reading a medical chart they already know is bad. Young listened. His jaw tightened once. He responded, 3 words, and the older man shook his head and said something that sounded, even without the language, like a correction. "She's with me," Young said in English, which she understood was for her benefit, an acknowledgement that she was present and relevant and not to be managed around. "Tell her what you told me." The older man looked at her for a long moment, assessing, not with hostility, but with the careful attention of someone who has spent a lifetime determining very quickly who can be trusted with which category of information, and is now running that calculation under significant time pressure. "My name is Sung," he said. His English was precise and slightly formal, the English of someone who learned it from books before people. "I have worked at this estate for 19 years. I am also the person who has been trying to reach him." She understood he meant Hae Young for the past 11 days, through channels that someone inside his organization has been systematically blocking. Sheila registered that and set it aside for the second it would need when she had more pieces to attach it to. "What do you know about the compound?" she said. "Everything," Sung said, "because I'm the one who identified it." He moved them deeper into the tunnel as he talked, away from the branch point and toward a section she hadn't mapped, a widening in the passage where the stone walls gave way briefly to fitted wood paneling that suggested a former purpose. A staging area, maybe, or a rest point for the labor that had once moved through here continuously. There was a work lamp on a hook that ran on a battery pack, and when Sung lit it, the quality of the space changed from absolute dark to something functional and stark. Hae Young sat on the bench that ran along the paneled wall. Sheila stood. Sung opened a bag she hadn't noticed him carrying, canvas, worn, the kind of bag that looks like it belongs in a gardening shed and therefore travels anywhere on an estate property without generating a second glance. And from it, he produced a small glass vial, a folded paper, and a thermos. "Not coffee," he said, before either of them could speak. "Ginger and licorice root. It won't reverse what's in him, but it will slow the hepatic processing rate and buy time." He handed the thermos to Hae Young, who took it without ceremony and drank, which told Sheila that whatever Sung was, whatever the precise nature of this 19-year relationship, it occupied a category of trust that existed below protocol and above ordinary loyalty. She looked at the vial. It contained approximately 2 milliliters of a pale amber liquid with the slight viscosity of something suspended in a glycerin base. She looked at the folded paper. Chemical notation, handwritten, dense. "It wasn't a sudden attack," Sung said. "It was a slow-motion execution." He said it the way people state things they have been carrying alone for long enough that the weight of them has compressed into something very compact and very hard. Not with drama, with the flat exhaustion of a man who has been right about something terrible for weeks and has had no mechanism to make anyone listen. "The compound in the bowl tonight, the one your fiancé added," she looked at Hae Young when she said it, and he did not flinch, "is a thiol disulfide agent. Specifically a modified version of a compound originally developed for agricultural use, a pesticide derivative that was reformulated approximately 8 years ago by a pharmaceutical research group operating out of 3 cities simultaneously. It binds to hemoglobin with high affinity and reduces oxygen-carrying capacity without triggering the standard immune markers that a hospital tox screen would catch. It looks, on a standard panel, like anemia, like fatigue, like stress-related cardiovascular strain. Someone he sees every morning is the person who wants him dead. Sheila was already ahead of her. The coffee. The coffee, Sung confirmed. The primer compound has been present in his morning coffee for between 6 and 9 weeks. I found the first traces in a sample I collected from the kitchen waste 22 days ago. Small doses, subsymptomatic individually, accumulating. The primer has a half-life of approximately 72 hours, which means the body never fully clears it between doses, and over 6 weeks the tissue saturation reaches a threshold level that makes the subject. She noticed he said subject rather than him, and understood this was how Sung managed the emotional distance required to keep thinking clearly, acutely vulnerable to the activating agent. "Which was what Veronica added tonight," Sheila said. "Which was what she added tonight," Sung said. "The activating agent alone, administered to a healthy person, would produce mild symptoms. Discomfort. Perhaps a brief respiratory episode that could be attributed to anxiety or an allergic response, but administered to a system that has been saturated with the primer compound for weeks. It becomes a systemic shutdown," Sheila said. "Staged to look like a sudden medical emergency," Sung said. "Cause of death, if it reached that point, would most likely be recorded as acute respiratory failure secondary to an undiagnosed cardiac condition. There would be no compound detected on a standard autopsy panel. There would be nothing to indicate anything other than a powerful man with a heart that gave out at his own engagement dinner. The room was very quiet for a moment. Young, she realized, had been listening to all of this without moving. Not with the stillness of a man in shock, with the stillness of a man filing information into a strategic framework that was already running parallel to the conversation, already beginning to restructure around new coordinates. His breathing was still labored. His color was still wrong. He was doing all of this at reduced capacity, and the fact that he was doing it at all told her something she added to her understanding of him without quite knowing yet what to do with it. "Who prepared the coffee?" he said. His voice was directed at Sung and carried, underneath its careful evenness, the specific weight of a question that already suspects its own answer. Sung looked at him for a moment. "Your morning prep has been handled for the past 3 months by the same person," Sung said, "on your instruction. A rotation you approved yourself following the restructure of the household staff in February." Young said nothing. "The restructure," Sheila said, because she needed the thread pulled. "What changed in February?" Sung folded the paper back along its creases. His hands were very steady. 3 staff positions were externally filled following the retirement of long-term members. The hearing was processed through the estate's standard agency. 2 of the 3 positions have been unremarkable. The third, the morning kitchen prep, was filled by a candidate whose credentials, I have since discovered, were constructed. "Constructed," Young said. "The placement agency that processed the hire does not exist at the address listed on the contract," Sung said. "The previous employer references respond to verification calls because they are answered by a forwarding service. The candidate's culinary certification was issued by an institution that closed 4 years ago and does not issue retroactive credentials. Someone built a person to place inside this household, and they built them carefully enough that the construction held for 3 months. The antidote isn't a pill," Sheila thought. "It's a confrontation. Not with Veronica, who was the visible edge of this. With whoever had the patience and the resources to construct a false identity, place it inside Young's household, and spend 3 months building a toxin into his daily routine before Veronica ever uncapped that dropper. Veronica was the activating agent. The mole was the primer. And like the compound itself, the mole had been designed to look like nothing at all." She looked at Sung's vial, at the chemical notation on the paper. "N-acetylcysteine will help," she said. "It's a thiol donor. It competes with the compound for hemoglobin binding sites and gives the body something to preferentially attach to while the existing compound is processed out. It won't reverse what's already bound, but it slows the progression and reduces the saturation rate. Do you have it?" Sung reached into the canvas bag and produced a small sealed packet. Pharmaceutical grade, labeled in characters she couldn't read, but in a format she recognized. "You came prepared," she said. "I have been trying to reach him for 11 days, Sung said again. And this time the flatness of it had something beneath it that she identified, after a moment, as grief. The grief of a person who understood exactly what was at stake and had been watching the window narrow. She took the packet, looked at the dosage, looked at Young. "This is going to taste terrible," she said. He held out his hand without comment. She administered it and watched him swallow it with the thermos, and then she sat down on the bench across from him. Because her legs had been making a request, she had been deferring for the past hour, and the request was now non-negotiable. For a moment, none of them spoke. Then Young said, to Sung, in the measured tone of a man choosing his words with a precision that had nothing to do with effort and everything to do with the understanding that the next words would set something in motion that could not be recalled. "You said the mole's position was morning kitchen prep." "Yes." Who else had access to the morning kitchen during that rotation? Sung was quiet for exactly the length of time it takes a person to decide whether to say the thing they have been most reluctant to say. "The prep position reports directly to the household manager," Sung said. daily schedule, supply requisitions, access to the primary kitchen before the rest of the staff arrives. The household manager reviews and approves all of it. Hae-young's expression did not change. But something behind it did. Who is the household manager? Sheila said, because she needed it stated directly, needed it in the air between them where it could be examined. Sung looked at her. His name is Di-soo, he said. He has been with the Young family for 11 years. He was in the dining hall tonight when you raised the alarm. He was one of the first people Kenji called when Mr. Young began to deteriorate. He was one of the people who directed the medical team, Sheila said, and the sentence finished itself in her head before she finished it aloud. He was the one who knew what the medical team was going to try. He was the one who knew it wouldn't work. He was the one who had brought the coffee cup to the holding room during the lockdown, with steam still rising from it, placed it on the side table with the calm authority of a man who had been performing trustworthiness in this building for 11 years and had never once been asked to prove it. She looked at Hae-young. He was already looking at the tunnel entrance. Di-soo, he said quietly, knows this building as well as Sung does. Better, Sung said. He oversaw the renovation of the service infrastructure in 2019. He has the full schematic. Which means, Sheila said, he knows every exit we might take. And every place we might stop, Hae-young said. The work lamp on the hook threw their shadows long against the wood paneling and the stone, 3 people in a tunnel beneath a compromised building, and the shadows moved slightly with the draft that came from somewhere further in the passage. The draft that meant another door, another route, another set of variables in a problem that had just fundamentally changed shape. Because they weren't only running from Veronica's assassins. They were running from the man who knew exactly where the tunnels went. They had been in the tunnel for 23 minutes when Sung's phone produced a single vibration against the stone wall where he had set it face down, and the quality of his stillness when he picked it up and read the screen communicated, before he said a single word, that the information on it was the kind that changes the shape of everything that follows it. He looked at Hae-young first, then at Sheila. There is a message, he said, being routed through the estate's external communication relay. It was flagged by the monitoring system I set up 11 days ago when I first identified the compound. It is addressed to you, he said, and this time he was looking only at Sheila. She took the phone. The message contained a location, a time stamp from 4 minutes ago, and a file attachment. The attachment was an audio clip, 47 seconds long. She knew before she pressed play, knew in the specific cellular way that children of mothers they have spent their entire lives quietly, constantly worrying about always know when the thing they feared most has stopped being hypothetical. She pressed play. Her mother's voice came through the speaker, small and compressed by the recording, but completely, unmistakably itself. The voice that had read to her through fevers, that had argued with hospital billing departments without flinching, that had said, the day Sheila withdrew from pre-med, that it was only a pause and not a stop, with the specific conviction of a woman who had decided her daughter's life was not going to be defined by their debt no matter how loud the debt got. The recording lasted 11 seconds before another voice entered it. She didn't use a gun to break me. She used my mother's voice on a recording. Veronica's English was unaccented and perfectly modulated and utterly without temperature. The voice of a person who had excised emotion from their communication, not as a performance, but as a permanent architectural choice. She said, "Your mother is comfortable. She will remain comfortable for exactly as long as it takes you to do one simple thing. There is a medical kit being prepared by Di-soo and delivered to wherever you are currently hiding. Inside it, in a standard dosage syringe labeled N-acetylcysteine, is the final activating compound. You will administer it to Hae-young under the cover of treatment. You have medical knowledge. You have his trust. You are the only person in that tunnel he will not question when you tell him it is medicine. When it is done, call the number at the end of this message. Your mother comes home. This is not a negotiation. It is a logistics problem with a very simple solution." The recording ended. Sheila stood in the tunnel with Sung's phone in her hand and 47 seconds of audio, that had just restructured every variable in a problem she had already been solving at the edge of her capacity. And she did not move for a long moment because moving required knowing which direction to go, and she did not yet know that. She was aware of Young watching her. She was aware of Sung watching her. She turned the phone over in her hands once, the way she turned things over when she needed the physical gesture to buy the mental processing time. And then she set it down on the bench with a care that was not gentleness, but control, the specific deliberateness of a person keeping their hands from doing something less controlled. He leaned on me, his weight the heaviest truth I've ever carried, and now someone had decided that weight was a lever. Young said. I heard it, she said. She did not look at him yet because looking at him required having already resolved something she had not resolved. Then look at me, he said. She looked at him. His oxygen saturation was still too low. The N-acetylcysteine was working. She could see it in the marginally improved quality of his breathing, the color in his face no longer actively worsening, but working slowly, the way the correct treatment of a compound this sophisticated always worked, without drama, without the clean satisfaction of a visible turning point. He needed more time and more treatment, and a facility with the right equipment. And instead he was in a tunnel beneath a compromised building, with a woman who had just been handed a syringe and an instruction. What did she offer you? He said. My mother, Sheila said. He absorbed that. Not with surprise, she had the sense that very little surprised him in the operational sense, that his world had trained surprise out of him, the way certain environments train out the expectation of comfort. But he absorbed it with the weight it deserved, which was more than she had expected. She is currently with Veronica's people, Sheila said. She was at home, she would have been alone. My mother works the early shift at a care facility, and she comes home at 9, and she eats at the same table in the same chair, and the lights go off at the same time every night. And anyone who had been watching the household for more than 48 hours would know exactly when she would be alone, and exactly how to access a ground-floor apartment with a door that my mother has been meaning to get a better lock for since January. She stopped. She had not intended to say that last part. The detail about the lock was not operationally relevant, and she did not know why it had come out, except that it was the detail her mind kept returning to, the specific small failure of timing that had made this possible. The lock she had been going to replace herself next month when she had the money, and now her mother was somewhere with Veronica's people, because the month hadn't come yet. I had to choose between the man I saved and the woman who gave me life. Sung, Young said, without taking his eyes from Sheila's face. Location. Sung was already working the phone. The relay bounced 3 times, he said, but the origin signal has a cell tower signature that places it within a 4-kilometer radius of the eastern waterfront. Specifically, the warehouse district adjacent to the Port Authority offices. The harbor, Sheila said. The harbor, Young confirmed, where the treaty signing is scheduled for 72 hours from now. She is positioning your mother at the site of the endgame. She is consolidating. She's efficient, Sheila said, and heard in her own voice a flatness that was not quite admiration and not quite anything else she had a name for. She is, Young said simply. The kit arrived 20 minutes later. Not delivered by Disu directly, that would have been too visible, too easily clocked as a plant. It was left at the tunnel's secondary entry point, the one Sung had come through, placed inside a groundskeeping supply crate with the specific camouflage of something that had always belonged there. Sung retrieved it, set it on the bench, opened it without touching the syringe. It was there, labeled exactly as Veronica had described. N-acetylcysteine, the correct font, the correct label format, the correct color coding. The kind of forgery that passes a visual inspection by anyone who has not spent time in a clinical environment learning to read the specific micro-differences between pharmaceutical manufacturing and its replication. Sheila had spent time in that environment. She picked up the syringe. The syringe in my hand felt like a dagger against my own heart. Not because she didn't know what she was going to do. She had known, with a clarity that arrived fully formed the moment she set Sung's phone down on the bench, that she was not going to administer this. That knowledge was not the hard part. The hard part was that knowing what you will not do tells you nothing at all about how to protect the people who are being used to make you do it. She held the syringe to the lamp. The solution inside it was clear, correctly viscous for the labeled compound. The forgery was good enough that she needed 45 seconds of examination and her full clinical attention to find the differentiating marker, which was a very slight opalescence in the meniscus. A surface tension behavior that pure N-acetylcysteine in aqueous suspension does not produce, but that certain thiol-reactive compounds do when they are prepared in a glycerin carrier to slow their release rate on injection. The final activating dose. Slow release, designed to be administered under the cover of legitimate treatment, designed to look, on any subsequent examination, like a medical intervention that had unfortunately failed to reverse a pre-existing toxic exposure. It wasn't a sudden attack, it was a slow-motion execution. And the execution had been designed, from its first stage to its last, with enough plausible deniability layered into each step that Veronica could have stood in a courtroom 6 months from now and presented the entire sequence as a tragedy. A fiancé's grief. A server's desperate and misguided attempt at amateur medicine. A man whose health had been declining for reasons no one had caught in time. Sheila set the syringe back in the kit. She looked at Hae-young. "I'm not going to use it," she said. "I know," he said. "Then we need to talk about what I'm going to tell her when I call the number," she said. "Because if I don't call it, or if I call it without something credible enough to hold her, she has no reason to keep my mother in the condition she is currently in." Hae-young was quiet for a moment. Then, "What do you need from me?" "Access," she said, "to wherever your people are currently positioned outside this perimeter, to a communication channel D-Sue cannot monitor, and to whatever you know about the warehouse district on the eastern waterfront that I don't, which is probably everything." He looked at her with that burning quality for a long moment. Then he looked at Sung and said something in Korean, 3 sentences, and Sung's expression shifted through something complex and arrived at a place that looked, cautiously and without commitment, like the first edge of a plan. Sung reached into the canvas bag for the 3rd time. The object he placed on the bench between them was a phone. Older model, the kind with a physical keypad, the kind that does not triangulate cleanly and does not log to a cloud server, and does not exist in any registry connected to the Young estate or its associated operations. "One number in it," Sung said. "Someone who is not on D-Sue's access list. Someone Veronica does not know exists. He has been outside the perimeter since the power went down. He saw the incursion team come over the east wall, and he has been tracking them since." "Who is he?" Sheila said. "Someone who sees everything and appears to be no one," Sung said, and looked at her with the specific expression of a person making an intentional point. She understood him. She picked up the phone. But before she dialed, she looked at Hae-young again, because there was something she needed to say, and she did not know how long they were going to have in a space where it could be said without the shape of it being used against one of them later. "If this goes wrong," she said, "if I miscalculate somewhere in the next several hours and the outcome is not what I'm working toward, I need you to make sure my mother is brought out regardless. Not as a condition of my helping you. Not contingent on anything. Just as a thing that happens, because she has nothing to do with any of this, and she has already paid more than enough for the fact of being related to someone who couldn't watch a man die." Hae-young held her gaze. "On my name," he said. And she understood, in the way you understand things that are communicated in a register below language, that in his world those 3 words were not a pleasantry or a gesture. They were a contract. She dialed. The phone rang twice before Veronica answered. No greeting, just silence that expected to be filled. "It's done," Sheila said. She kept her voice flat, calibrated to sound like a woman who has made a terrible decision and is now on the other side of it, in the specific emotional register of someone who has stopped fighting. He didn't question it. The label was convincing. He's resting. A pause, the kind of pause that belongs to a person running their own assessment. "How long?" Veronica said. She's asking for the compound's timeline. Sheila had anticipated this. Given his current saturation levels, she said, and the slow-release carrier, 4 to 6 hours before it becomes clinically irreversible. Possibly less. Another pause, longer. You understand, Veronica said, that I will verify this before your mother leaves. I understand, Sheila said. Then we'll speak again in 2 hours, Veronica said, and the line went dead. Sheila lowered the phone. 2 hours, she said. Hey Young had already straightened off the bench, the thermos set aside, the particular quality of stillness replaced by something with direction in it. The N-acetylcysteine was buying them time. Not enough, but time was a variable that could be worked with in a way that no time at all could not. 2 hours, he said, is sufficient. For what? She said. To let her believe she has already won, he said. There is no more dangerous position for Veronica Stalin than certainty. She stops watching the angles she thinks are closed. She thinks I'm the angle she closed, Sheila said. You aren't a ghost anymore, Sheila, he said quietly, and the echo of the words from the dining room, the world she had been running from, the invisibility she had built into a survival mechanism, landed differently here in the cold, and the dark, and the specific truth of a situation that had burned away every layer of performance available to both of them. You're the one directing the scene. She looked at the kit on the bench, at the syringe with its slow-release payload, at the phone in her hand and the number in it that belonged to someone who saw everything and appeared to be no one. She thought about her mother at the same table in the same chair, with the lights about to go off. She thought about the lock she hadn't replaced yet. She thought, not yet. But soon. The switch took 4 minutes and a steady hand. Sung had the materials, not everything she wanted, but enough of what she needed, which was the operational difference between ideal conditions and real ones, and Sheila had spent enough of her life working in real ones to know how to close the gap. The glycerin carrier in the original syringe she emptied into the tunnel drain. The compound itself she sealed in the vial casing from Sung's kit, labeled it in her own handwriting with a notation system she had developed in her second year of pharmacology for tracking sample integrity, and placed it in the canvas bag. Evidence. Chain of custody starting now, in a tunnel, by lamplight, which was not how she had imagined evidence collection working when she had pictured her future in medicine. But the future she had pictured and the future she was currently inhabiting had stopped resembling each other approximately 4 hours ago. The replacement solution was saline with a buffered pH adjusted to match the viscosity profile of the original. It would not pass a laboratory analysis. It did not need to. It needed to pass 47 seconds of visual inspection by someone who would be verifying via phone call rather than direct examination, which meant it needed to pass Veronica's confidence in her own design rather than Veronica's chemistry knowledge. Veronica thinks she's the one holding the leash. The leash runs both directions. That was the thing about using someone as an instrument. You had to maintain contact with them. And contact, in Sheila's experience, was always a two-way transmission. She capped the replacement syringe, replaced it in the kit, closed the kit. Hey Young was watching her work with the focused attention he brought to everything, the quality of observation that did not perform itself. At some point in the last 20 minutes, his breathing had shifted, not normalized, not yet, but the labored bracing quality had reduced to something more manageable, the N-acetylcysteine doing the slow, unglamorous work of competitive binding, while his body processed what it could. He was functional. Not at full capacity, but functional was the threshold they needed, and they had it. Sung's contact, the man with the old keypad phone, the one who saw everything and appeared to be no one, had sent 3 messages in the past hour. The first confirmed that Veronica's incursion team had pulled back from the estate perimeter following her call with Sheila, which meant she had accepted the report of completion and was now managing the next phase rather than the current one. The second gave a location in the warehouse district, a specific building, Pier 7, the Port Authority's decommissioned inspection facility, a structure that had been empty for 2 years and was therefore off the active monitoring grid of every agency that might otherwise be paying attention to what happened inside it. The third message was 4 words. Your mother is inside. Sheila had read it and set the phone down and picked up the empty syringe casing and focused on the work in front of her. Because the work was the mechanism by which she was going to get her mother out, and there was no version of the next several hours that did not run directly through the work. Pier 7, she said to Young. He nodded. He already knew. That's where the treaty signing is scheduled, she said. In 61 hours, yes, he said. The rival syndicate's representative arrives by water. The documents transfer control of the Port Authority contracts. If I am not present to contest them, if I am dead, or legally incapacitated, or represented by a power of attorney holder, the signing proceeds without my objection. Veronica holds the power of attorney documents, Sheila said. She has held them for 4 months, Young said. I signed them during what she described as routine estate planning. I was, at that time, already experiencing the early effects of the primer compound. I was tired. I was not paying the quality of attention I should have been paying. He said it without self-recrimination, which she was learning was characteristic. He catalogued his own errors with the same flat precision he applied to everything else, not to punish himself with them, but to ensure they were fully understood and therefore not repeated. She chose the moment carefully, Sheila said. She chooses everything carefully, he said. That is what makes her genuinely dangerous rather than merely ambitious. The plan did not begin with tonight. Tonight was the final movement of something she has been composing for the better part of a year. How long have you known? Sheila said. He was quiet for a moment, long enough that she understood the answer was not a number of days. I suspected, he said, that something was wrong with the direction she was pulling the business. The port contracts, the rival syndicate, the specific sequence of decisions she advocated for over the past 6 months. Individually, each one was arguable. Collectively, they formed a pattern that I had not yet fully named when you walked through the dining room door. She named it for you, Sheila said. You named it, he said. She simply confirmed it. They left the tunnel at 11:47 through the utility building exit, into the cold salt air of a city that did not know what was running through its underbelly tonight, which was most nights in Sheila's experience, but felt more pointed than usual given the specific content of what was currently running. Sung's contact was waiting with a vehicle, unremarkable, a delivery model, the kind that moves through a port district at midnight without generating documentation, because port districts run on delivery cycles that don't observe standard hours. The contact himself was younger than she had expected, slight, with the efficient movements of someone accustomed to operating in spaces where the wrong movement at the wrong moment has consequences. He did not introduce himself. He looked at Young with the specific expression of a person who has been worried for a long time and is now making a rapid recalibration toward cautious relief. He looked at Sheila with something she couldn't immediately categorize. She'll ride in front, Young said. The contact nodded without question, and she understood, from the speed of that acceptance, that Young had said something more in those 3 words than their surface content, that he had communicated, in the compact language of his world, that she was not a civilian passenger or a protected asset or a problem being managed. She was operational. She got in front. The harbor at night is a graveyard for people like us. Not metaphorically. The decommissioned Pier district had a specific quality of abandonment that went beyond disuse, the kind of place that accumulates the residue of things that ended badly, where the infrastructure outlasts its purpose and sits in the dark smelling of salt and rust, and the particular absence of accountability that comes with being outside the lit perimeter of the places people choose to look. Pier 7 was 4 buildings in from the active dock, separated from the working port by a chain-link fence that had 3 years of weather damage along its eastern seam and could be folded back in a way that looked, from a distance, like it was intact. She noted this as the contact drove past it without stopping, mapping the approach from the vehicle the way she mapped rooms on arrival, exits, sightlines, the relationship between where the light was and where it wasn't. The building was 3 stories. Ground floor, former inspection processing. Upper floors, former administrative. The lights on the second floor were visible through the boards on the windows. Not bright, controlled. The specific light management of people who needed to function inside a space without advertising their presence in it. Her mother was on the second floor. She knew this without being told. The way you know certain things when the knowing is built from a specific combination of fear and logic, and the particular species of attention that comes from having spent your entire life monitoring environments for threat. 2 guards on the ground approach, the contact said quietly, 1 on the interior stair. Veronica herself is on the second floor with 2 additional personnel. Your mother is in the northeast room, 1 guard at the door. You've been inside, Sheila said. Earlier today, he said, and did not elaborate, and she did not ask. She turned to look at Hae-young in the back seat. He was already looking at her. I wasn't playing the maid anymore. I was the one directing the scene. Here is what I need, she said, and she said it the way she had learned to say things in the last 4 hours. Not tentatively, not with the apologetic softness she had spent years applying to her own voice in rooms full of people who outranked her, but with the flat clarity of someone who has assessed a situation and arrived at conclusions and is now communicating them. She laid it out, the approach sequence, the communication timing, the specific window created by Veronica's expectation of a phone call confirming the compound's progress, a call she was going to make, but not with the content Veronica was expecting. The kit with the switched syringe, which was the prop around which the entire misdirection would pivot. The fact that Veronica's confidence in her own design was the structural weakness at the center of a plan that had been otherwise meticulously constructed. She had accounted for Hae-young's resources, his security, his tactical knowledge. She had not accounted for the variable that didn't fit any category she had prepared for. She hadn't accounted for Sheila. Not because Sheila had been invisible. Because Veronica had chosen to keep her invisible, had selected her as the instrument of the final act specifically, because she was the least threatening-looking element in the entire operation, and that selection had created the one blind spot in an otherwise comprehensive plan. The instrument knew what it was carrying, and it had switched the payload. Hae-young listened to all of it. When she finished, he said, "The document case." She nodded. She had included it, the signed power of attorney documents that Veronica would have on her person or in the building, the physical object around which the legal architecture of the entire takeover was constructed. Without them, the treaty signing was contested. With them and without Hae-young's living, coherent, legally competent presence to contest them, the port contracts transferred. "The documents need to come out of that building with us," Sheila said. "Along with your mother," he said. "Along with my mother," she confirmed. "And Veronica," he said, "needs to believe, for as long as possible, that the outcome is running according to her design." "That's why I'm making the call," Sheila said. She looked at the building. At the second floor light behind the boards. At the eastern fence seam, 4 buildings back, which she had already mapped as the secondary exit. She doesn't know that I know what the compound was. She doesn't know about Sung. She doesn't know that the syringe in that kit is saline. And she doesn't know, she paused, that Hae-young is functional. She designed the timeline around a man who should currently be in the progressive stages of respiratory failure. She is expecting to manage a transfer of power, not a confrontation with the person she was transferring it from. "Veronica thinks she's the one holding the leash," she said. "And the leash," Hae-young said quietly, "is attached to nothing." Sheila took the phone. Dialed. Veronica answered on the second ring, the same controlled silence that expected filling. "It's been 2 hours," Sheila said. "I'm calling as agreed." "His condition," Veronica said. "Progressing," Sheila said. "The slow-release carrier is performing the way you described. He's resting. His team thinks it's the treatment working." A pause, the assessment pause, the one she had prepared for. "You sound calm," Veronica said. "I made a decision," Sheila said. The flatness in her voice was real, which made it convincing. It simply wasn't the decision Veronica believed she was hearing in it. People sound calm when they've committed to a direction. She was committed. "My mother," she said, "will be released from Pier 7 when I have independent verification of his condition," Veronica said. "Come to the pier. Bring the kit. You present the kit to my medical person, they verify the syringe contents, and your mother walks out." Sheila looked at Young. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "I'll be there in 40 minutes, Sheila said. The line went dead. She lowered the phone and sat with the silence for a moment, the harbor air coming through the vehicle's ventilation, salt-heavy and cold, the kind of cold that has permanence to it. The contact looked at her from the driver's seat. She looked at the building. The harbor at night is a graveyard for people like us, she thought. Which meant they needed to make sure they were not the ones getting buried in it. "As a part of our Dora'sArchives family, I want to make sure you don't miss this. This is for United States citizens only, so if that's you, here is what I need you to do the moment this video ends. Scan the QR code on your screen, click the link in the description, or go directly to Dora'sArchives.com. Answer a few simple questions, get instantly matched with benefits you qualify for, and start receiving monthly funds for groceries and essentials. If anything on the survey feels unclear, drop it in the comments or email me directly. I will help you every step of the way. This opportunity will not stay open forever. Check today. You deserve this." They arrived 32 minutes early. Not Sheila. The rival syndicate. She heard them before she saw them, or rather, she heard the quality of the harbor change, the specific shift in ambient sound that happens when the number of people in a space increases suddenly, and those people are not moving the way civilians move. No conversation, no incidental noise. The deliberate, distributed silence of a coordinated approach, which is its own kind of sound once you know how to listen for it. She was at the eastern fence seam when it happened, 3 minutes ahead of her own approach schedule, the kit in her left hand and the replaced syringe inside it, and the weight of everything the kit represented sitting in her chest in a way that was not quite fear and not quite resolve, but the specific compound of both that forms when you are past the point of reconsidering and fully inside the execution of a thing. The contact's voice came through the earpiece Sung had produced from the canvas bag with the same quiet preparedness he had produced everything else from it. 3 vessels. East Dock. They weren't expected until morning. Sheila stopped at the fence. Young's voice, from the position he had taken at the building's northern approach with 2 of his people who had been waiting outside the perimeter since the estate went dark. How many? Counting, the contact said, then 12 minimum. A pause that had a specific texture, the texture of a man recalibrating a plan that had been built around a different set of variables, doing it in real time, without the luxury of doing it slowly. "Sheila," Young said. "I heard," she said. "The timeline moves," he said. "The document case is the priority. Everything else is secondary. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" She understood. He was telling her that in the next several minutes the building was going to become a place where the primary preoccupation of every armed person inside it was going to be something other than a woman with a medical kit. And that window, the window created by chaos, by the sudden redirection of attention, by the harbor becoming something considerably louder than a meeting point, was the window she needed to move through before it closed. She understood something else, too. Her mother was on the 2nd floor. "Go," Young said. She went through the fence. The ground floor hit her with sound before light, voices in 2 languages, neither of which was English. The specific overlapping communication of people responding to a development that had arrived ahead of schedule and was requiring rapid reorientation. She moved along the interior wall, below the sight line of the windows, in the shadow cast by the inspection equipment that had been left in place when the facility decommissioned, and now served, accidentally, as the kind of cover that you could not have designed better if you had tried. Bullets don't care about your social status. She had been telling herself this since the vehicle, a reminder aimed at the part of her that had spent years operating on the assumption that the violence in rooms like this one was directional, that it traveled toward the people it was intended for and left the unintended ones alone. That assumption was a luxury she did not currently have. She stayed low. She stayed against the wall. She moved. The stairwell was at the building's center, exactly where the contact had described it, and the guard who had been posted at its base was no longer at its base. She could hear him near the eastern window, drawn there by the sound of the syndicate's approach, his attention fully redirected toward the development outside. She took the stairs. Second floor. The hallway ran the building's length with doors on both sides, the administrative rooms of a facility that had once processed the paperwork of a functioning port and now processed nothing. The light she had seen from outside came from the room at the far end, the one Veronica had chosen for its sightlines, its distance from the ground floor entry points, its position as the last room anyone approaching from below would reach. The northeast room was not the far end. The northeast room was the second door on her right. One guard at the door, the contact had said. One. He was there, older than she expected, heavyset, with the posture of a man who had been standing in the same position for long enough that alertness had become effort. His attention, like the guard below, had partially migrated toward the sound coming from the harbor, not fully, not enough to have left his post, but enough that the quality of his vigilance had a gap in it. She had one option that did not involve a confrontation she was not equipped to win. She held up the medical kit. Treatment for the hostage, she said, authorized by Miss Stalin. There was a reaction to the sedative. The specific language of a person who knows the operational vocabulary of the situation. Sedative, authorized, reaction. Landed in the gap in his vigilance, and she watched it work. Watched him run the cost-benefit of verifying against the cost-benefit of the building, currently reorganizing itself around a crisis that had not been on the evening's schedule. He stepped aside. She went through the door. Her mother was seated in a chair near the window, her wrists zip-tied to its arms, a strip of tape across her mouth that she had clearly been working against for long enough that its adhesion was compromised at the left corner. She was wearing the cardigan she always wore on cold evenings at home, the green one with the missing button on the third snap that Sheila had been meaning to replace since November. And the sight of it, the specific domestic familiarity of it in this specific context, did something to Sheila's chest that she did not have time to fully feel, and therefore compressed into the place where she stored things that required processing later. Her mother's eyes found hers, and the expression in them moved through three things in rapid sequence: relief, terror, and then something that resolved into a particular maternal fury that Sheila recognized as the face her mother made when she was most frightened and least willing to show it. She crossed the room, the tape first, careful at the left corner where it had already lifted. Her mother exhaled sharply, a sound that was not quite a word but contained all the content of several. The zip ties required the edge of the kit's metal clasp, which was not designed for it but functioned adequately, which was the operational story of this entire night. 30 seconds. Her mother's wrists came free. "We have to move," Sheila said quietly. Her mother looked at her with the expression of a woman assembling a great deal of information very rapidly. Then she stood, which was answer enough. The guard outside the door had not moved. She could hear him through the wood, still at his post, but his radio was active now, receiving traffic from the ground floor, and the traffic had the clipped urgency of people managing something that was accelerating. "Window," Sheila said to her mother. Her mother looked at the window, looked at Sheila, looked at the window again. "It's the second floor," her mother said. "There's a loading dock extension below it," Sheila said. 8 feet. "I need you to trust me." Her mother sat on the sill with the compressed dignity of a woman who had raised her daughter to be exactly this resourceful, and was now experiencing the specific terror of that upbringing in practice. She went over. The sound she made landing told Sheila the distance was manageable, and she followed, the kit still in her left hand, the metal clasp having earned its place in the operation. Her mother was already moving toward the fence line. "Go straight east," Sheila said. "The contact is at the vehicle 2 buildings down. Don't stop." Her mother looked at her. "You're not coming," her mother said. It was not a question. "Not yet," Sheila said. Her mother held her gaze for 3 seconds. The 3 seconds of a woman running every maternal calculation available to her and arriving, with visible difficulty, at the conclusion that her daughter was the one person on this property who knew what she was doing. She went. The document case was in Veronica's room. Sheila knew this the way she knew the Northeast room, from the contact's intelligence, from the building's logic, from the understanding that a woman who had spent 11 months constructing this plan was not going to store its central instrument anywhere she was not. The far room, the one with the sightlines. The building was louder now. The firefight had found its full register, not close yet, the syndicate still working the exterior approach. Young's people managing the perimeter engagement with the focused efficiency of people defending a position they had chosen rather than one they had been caught in. She could hear Kenji's voice somewhere below, which meant the estate's security had arrived at the harbor. Which meant the contact had executed that piece of the plan. Which meant the syndicate was now engaged on 2 sides, and Veronica's people inside the building were recalculating their available options in real time. Recalculating people look outward. Sheila moved inward. The hallway was empty. The far door was closed. She pressed herself against the wall beside it and listened, 2 voices inside, Veronica's and one other, speaking rapidly, the specific cadence of people revising a plan against a deadline. She looked at the kit in her hand. The last tool it had. She opened the door. Veronica turned from the window with the unhurried precision of a woman who does not startle, whose threat assessment has already been running and has already determined the category of what has entered the room. Her expression when it landed on Sheila moved through surprise, genuine, fractional, quickly managed, and into something considerably colder. "You're early," Veronica said. The other person in the room was not one she recognized, male, suited, with the specific blankness of professional hired function. His hand had moved to his jacket on her entry. "The kit," Veronica said, "set it on the table." Sheila set it on the table. In the chaos, the only thing that mattered was the girl everyone ignored. Veronica's attention moved to the kit with the focused assessment of someone who has been waiting for this object for the past 40 minutes. The suited man moved to the table, opened the kit, located the syringe, held it to the light. Sheila was not watching the syringe. She was watching the document case on the desk behind Veronica, dark leather, brass clasps, the kind of case that communicates the importance of its contents through its own physical quality. Exactly where it should be. Exactly where Veronica would need it in the next 61 hours when the syndicate's representative arrived by water and the treaty proceeded according to a plan that was now, from Veronica's current vantage point, still running on schedule. The suited man was examining the saline solution. He was going to take 30 seconds to visually verify it, another 15 to confirm viscosity. He did not have a chemical test kit. She had accounted for this in the plan, the assessment that field verification of a pharmaceutical compound in a decommissioned warehouse would be visual rather than analytical. She had 45 seconds. She counted. At 32, Veronica's radio produced a burst of traffic that reorganized her attention toward the window. Sheila picked up the document case. I saw the document, stained with the coffee he drank every morning. The brass clasp opened under her thumb, and she saw it, the power of attorney instrument, the port contract transfer authorization, the 11 months of careful construction that had been designed to survive Young's death and convert his empire into Veronica's inheritance. At the bottom right corner of the top document, a ring stain, the pale amber of a ceramic cup, the specific residue of a mourning ritual that had been weaponized so gradually that it had looked, for weeks, like nothing at all. She closed the case. Veronica turned from the window. Her eyes went to the case in Sheila's hand. The temperature of the room changed. Put it down, Veronica said, not loudly, the kind of quiet that has been very deliberately chosen over the louder alternative. The suited man's hand had returned to his jacket. Sheila held the case. She thought about the dining room, About the guests who had reached for the most comfortable explanation. About the room full of people who had looked through her for 4 hours and arrived at the wrong answer about what she was. She thought about Veronica, adjusting her pearls. "You built this for 11 months, Sheila said. You placed a person in his household. You managed a compound's progression with pharmaceutical precision. You used my mother's voice." Veronica said nothing. "You did all of that," Sheila said, "and the one variable you didn't account for was the girl clearing the garnish station." Something moved behind Veronica's eyes. Not fear. Something more complex than fear. The specific expression of a strategist encountering a gap in their own architecture that they cannot immediately explain. The suited man drew. The window behind Veronica came in. Not broken, opened, from the outside, by a hand that knew the latch, and through it came Kenji, who had apparently decided that the building's second floor was accessible from the loading dock extension, and had made the same calculation Sheila had made about the window 8 minutes ago. In the reorganization of the room that followed, the suited man redirecting, Veronica stepping back, Kenji landing and moving with the compressed efficiency of someone whose professional humiliation at the estate had given his movements tonight a very specific quality of purpose. Sheila went to the wall. She held the document case. She did not drop it. Bullets don't care about your social status, she thought, which was why she was staying exactly where the geometry of the room made her the least accessible target, which was a calculation she had run on entry and maintained continuously since, because this was what invisible people did. They understood the architecture of every room they were in. They knew where the walls were and what was behind them and how the space worked, and tonight that knowledge was the only armor available, and she was wearing all of it. The firefight below was thinning. She could hear it thinning, fewer exchanges, longer intervals, the specific acoustic pattern of an engagement reaching its resolution. Hey Young's people. Kenji's arrival. The syndicate recalculating its position against a defense that had turned out to be more coherent than the early chaos had suggested. Veronica looked at Sheila across the room, with the case in her hands, and the firefight below and Kenji between them, and the building that was no longer running on her schedule. For the first time tonight, she looked like a woman doing arithmetic that wasn't resolving in her favor. She looked at the empty syringe, casing on the table. She looked at Sheila. "You switched it," she said. "From a garnish station," Sheila said, 3 feet away. "I see things, Miss Stalin. That's all I have ever done." Veronica moved first. Not toward Sheila. Not toward Kenji. Toward the door, which was the correct tactical choice given the room's geometry and the position of its occupants, and it communicated, more clearly than anything she had said in the past several minutes, that she had completed her own arithmetic and arrived at the same answer Sheila had been sitting with since she picked up the document case. The plan had a gap. The gap had a name. Kenji was faster. Not dramatically, not the choreographed interception of someone who had been anticipating exactly this movement. The practical, efficient redirection of a man who had spent the better part of his career reading the micro-signals that precede a person's decision to run and had learned to begin moving approximately half a second before that decision, fully committed to the body. He had Veronica at the door before she reached it, one hand at her arm, the specific grip that communicated restraint rather than aggression because Kenji, whatever his failures of the evening had been, understood the difference between a threat that required force and a situation that required documentation. The suited man had gone still against the wall at some point during the reorganization of the room, the particular stillness of a professional who has correctly assessed that his principal's operation has concluded and is now in the process of determining what his own options are in its aftermath. Sheila noted him and kept the case and stayed against the wall. Veronica did not struggle. That was the thing about her. She had never been the kind of person who struggled against physical containment, because physical containment was a problem she had always been able to solve through other mechanisms. She went with Kenji's grip the way she went with everything, with the controlled acceptance of a woman treating a setback as a pause rather than a conclusion. She looked at the empty syringe, casing on the table. She looked at the document case in Sheila's hands. She looked at the empty vial and finally realized she'd lost. It moved across her face the way weather moves across a landscape. Not sudden, not dramatic, but irreversible once it started, the specific quality of a person watching the architecture of something they built with extraordinary care come apart at the load-bearing point they had not identified as load-bearing. It lasted approximately 3 seconds. Then her expression closed over it, and she was again the woman from the dining room, composed, impeccably surfaced, presenting nothing that she had not chosen to present. But Sheila had seen it. 3 seconds was enough. The board arrived at 47 minutes past midnight. She did not know how Hae Young had arranged it, did not know the calls made or the language used or the specific leverage applied to move 7 people from their beds and their security details to a decommissioned inspection facility on the eastern waterfront in the middle of a harbor district that was still settling from a firefight. She suspected the answer involved a combination of the old keypad phone, the contacts network, and the particular quality of authority that Hae Young carried even at reduced oxygen saturation, which was apparently more than most people carried at full capacity. They came in through the ground floor. 7 men and 1 woman, ranging from 60 to somewhere north of 70, wearing the specific combination of hastily assembled formal clothing and controlled alarm that belongs to powerful people summoned without adequate preparation time. They took the stairs with the assistance of Hae Young's people and arrived in the second-floor corridor to find a room that had been reorganized since the firefight into something approaching order. Veronica seated, the suited man secured, the document case on the table, and Hae Young standing at the window. The harbor went quiet when the dragon stood back up. Not literally. The harbor sounds continued, water, machinery, the distant radio traffic of the Port Authority becoming aware that something had happened in the decommissioned district. But the room went quiet when the board members processed what they were looking at, which was a man who, according to everything Veronica's design had been building toward, should not have been standing. The board member who spoke first was the oldest of them, a man whose name Sheila did not know, but whose bearing communicated decades of institutional seniority, the kind of authority that does not require announcement because it has never needed to compete for the space it occupies. He looked at Hae Young, then at Veronica, then back at Hae Young with the expression of a person running a very rapid reassessment of a situation they had been given incomplete information about. "You called this meeting," he said to Hae Young. "I did," Hae Young said, "because what is in that document case?" He did not gesture toward it, did not need to. The room's attention had already located it, was about to be used to transfer operational control of the port contracts to an external syndicate without the knowledge, consent, or vote of this board. And because the person who arranged that transfer spent 11 months building the mechanism for it inside this organization, inside this household, and inside my bloodstream. The oldest board member looked at Veronica. She looked back at him with the composed stillness of a woman who had decided that the only remaining asset available to her was her own bearing, and was deploying it with full commitment. "This is," she said carefully, "a significant mischaracterization of." "Sung," Hae Young said. Sung stepped forward from the corridor. He placed on the table, beside the document case, 3 items: a sealed vial containing the residue of the primer compound extracted from the kitchen waste, the chemical notation sheet in his handwriting, and a printed record of the placement agency that did not exist at its listed address. The board member examined them. Sung walked him through it in the same flat, precise language he had used in the tunnel compound class: accumulation timeline, activation mechanism, the specific construction of a false identity placed in the household's morning kitchen prep rotation. He spoke for 9 minutes without interruption, which was itself a form of information. 7 people who were accustomed to interrupting listened without doing it, because what he was presenting did not leave gaps that invited challenge. Veronica listened too. Sheila watched her listen and understood something she had not fully articulated before, which was that Veronica Stalin was, in the genuine and unironic sense, extraordinarily intelligent. The plan had been real. The construction of it had required a quality of strategic thinking that very few people possessed. The gap had not been a failure of intelligence. It had been a failure of categorization, the specific blindness that comes from building a plan around the people you can see and assigning the people you cannot see to the category of irrelevance. The Black Widow was just a woman with a broken plan. Not a diminishment, an accounting. She had built something significant and built it wrong at the foundation, and the foundation had been the assumption that the garnish station was empty. The board member set down Sung's documents. He looked at Veronica with an expression that had moved past surprise into something considerably more institutional. The look of an organization processing a betrayal, not with emotion, but with the specific machinery of consequence. The power of attorney instrument, he said, is invalid, Hae Young said, executed during a period of documented cognitive impairment resulting from deliberate toxic exposure. Sung's timeline establishes the compound's presence in my system, predating the signing by 3 weeks. I have a medical witness. He looked briefly at Sheila, who can establish the compound's neurological effects at the relevant concentration levels, which include impaired executive judgment and reduced capacity for informed consent. Sheila nodded once when the board member looked at her. She did not elaborate. She did not need to. The board member had the document in front of him and Sung's chemical notation beside it, and a man standing at the window who was demonstrably alive and demonstrably coherent and demonstrably in possession of the full picture, and the arithmetic of the situation was not complicated. The document case was opened. The power of attorney instrument was removed and placed separately from the port contract transfer authorization. The board member wrote something on its face in ink, a single word and his initials, and the word was void, and the writing of it was not dramatic in the way that the 11 months preceding it had been dramatic. It was simply a pen moving across paper, which is what the resolution of very large things almost always looks like from the outside. Veronica watched it happen. She looked at the empty vial on the table. She looked at Sheila. There was a long moment in which neither of them said anything, and in that moment, Sheila understood something about Veronica that she had not had the space to understand before, which was that the childhood Sung's outline had described, the political pawn, the early understanding of love as vulnerability, had produced a person who had decided, at some foundational level, that the only way to never be used again was to become the one doing the using. The plan had not been about greed, not at its center. It had been about sovereignty, about the specific terror of a person who had learned too early that the people closest to you are the ones with the best position to destroy you. Sheila did not say this. It was not the moment for it, and she was not the person to say it, and understanding something is not the same as excusing it. But she held it, the way she held things that were true and complicated and did not resolve cleanly. Kenji's radio broke the silence with traffic from outside, and the traffic had a different quality now. Not the clipped urgency of an active engagement, but the flattened, resolving cadence of a situation being contained. The syndicate's representative, the contact's voice said through the earpiece, "He's requesting a conversation." Hae Young moved away from the window. "Tell him," he said, "that the treaty signing has been postponed indefinitely, pending a review of the contracting party's authorization to sign. And tell him that if he would like to discuss the port contracts in a legitimate framework, my organization will schedule a meeting through the appropriate channels at a time of our choosing." A pause. "He's not going to like that," the contact said. "He doesn't have to like it," Hae Young said. "He has to accept it." He moved toward the door and stopped beside Sheila and looked at the document case in her hands. She held it out to him. He did not take it immediately. He looked at her holding it, the specific image of it, a woman in a server's uniform at the center of a room full of board members and evidence, and the resolved aftermath of a plan that had almost worked, and something moved across his face that was not the burning alertness she had been reading all night. Something quieter than that. Something that had to do with accounting, with the specific recognition of what a thing cost and who had paid it. He took the case. Her mother was in the vehicle, when Sheila came through the building's ground floor exit, which was not where she had left her, which for exactly 4 seconds produced a specific internal reorganization that she would describe to no one, because it lasted only 4 seconds, and then she saw the unremarkable delivery vehicle parked at the building's south approach, and through its window her mother's face. The contact had gone back for her. She had not asked him to. She had told her mother to go to the vehicle, and she had meant it as a direction to safety, not as a guarantee that the vehicle would remain at its original position for the duration of everything that followed. And the contact had apparently understood this gap and closed it without being asked, which was the operational definition of the kind of help you do not know you need until it has already been provided. She got in the vehicle. Her mother looked at her for a long moment with the specific expression of a woman taking a comprehensive inventory of her daughter's physical state. "You're not hurt," her mother said. It was not a question. It was a conclusion, delivered with the tone of someone who has just finished being terrified and is now processing the end of it. "I'm not hurt," Sheila said. Her mother nodded once. Then she reached over and took Sheila's hand, the right one, and held it the way she had held it through every difficult thing Sheila could remember, not tightly, not with the desperate grip of someone trying to anchor themselves, but with the steady, even pressure of a person communicating presence. That I am here. That you are here. That we are on the correct side of whatever just happened. They sat like that for a moment, while the harbor continued its resolving sounds around them. Her mother looked at the green cardigan, at the missing third button. "I've been meaning to fix that," Sheila said. Her mother smiled. The first full smile of the night, with everything in it. The relief and the fear and the particular pride of a woman looking at someone she raised. "So have I," her mother said. She finally received what she always deserved. "And I believe with everything in me that the same is available for you, not just in stories, but in your real life today. This is my gift to our Dora's Archives community, and it is only available to United States citizens. Here is your next step. Scan the QR code on your screen, click the link in the description, or visit Dora'sArchives.com. Answer a few simple questions, get instantly matched with benefits you qualify for, and start receiving monthly funds for groceries and essentials. If you ever get stuck on the survey, please come to the comments or send me an email. I will personally help you get the benefits you qualify for. But please don't wait. This window will not stay open. Take that step today. God bless you." 3 days after the harbor, Sheila went back to work. Not at the Young estate. The agency had 2 other properties on the rotation, and she had a shift at the Mercer building downtown, a corporate dinner for 40, the kind of event she had worked 100 times, linen service, plated courses, the invisible choreography of people who existed in a room only insofar as the room required them. She put on the uniform. She took the bus. She stood at the service entrance at 5:45 in the afternoon and waited for the freight elevator the way she always waited, with the particular patience of someone for whom waiting is a professional skill rather than an imposition. She lasted 11 minutes inside before she understood that something had changed that could not be unchanged. Not the room. The room was identical to every room she had worked in 3 years of this. The same linen, the same light, the same ambient noise of preparation moving toward presentation. The guests were different people doing the same things. The other servers were competent, focused, operating with the professional invisibility she had spent years cultivating in herself. That was the thing. She could see it now, the cultivation of it, the specific way each person in the service corridor had learned to make themselves smaller than the space they occupied, to move without generating friction, to exist in the peripheral vision of people with more power without ever resolving into full focus. She had done it herself. She had been good at it. She had believed, on some foundational level she had never examined directly, that this was simply what she was. The background, the infrastructure, the hand that cleared the plate before the next course arrived. The girl who saw the powder now sees the whole world differently. She finished the shift. She was professional about it because she was professional about everything, and that had not changed. But on the bus home, in the window seat she always took, She held the understanding quietly in her hands like something fragile and newly formed, and she did not try to put it back where it had been because she knew, with the certainty of a person who has been trained to recognize irreversible processes, that there was no putting it back. Some reactions only run in one direction. The meeting at the Young estate happened on a Thursday. She had been given no agenda. Kenji had called not a staff coordinator, not an assistant, Kenji directly, which was its own form of information, and said that Hae Young had requested her presence at 10 in the morning, and the specific language of the request, as Kenji relayed it, was not a summons and not an invitation, but something in between that carried the weight of significance without the performance of it. She wore her own clothes. This felt important in a way she did not entirely articulate even to herself. The estate looked different in the morning. She had only ever seen it in the operational context of evening events, the heightened, curated version of itself that it presented for guests, every surface managed, every angle considered. In the morning, it was simply a large house with good light, and the marble she had spent 3 shifts navigating in uniform was just stone, cold and pale, and indifferent to what it had witnessed 6 days ago. Kenji met her at the front entrance. Not the service entrance. She noted this without commenting on it and followed him through halls she had only ever moved through as background and found them, in this context, simply rooms. Large rooms. Rooms full of objects that had cost significant amounts of money. Rooms that were not, in any way that mattered, more real than the tunnel beneath them, where a man had drunk ginger tea in the dark while she told him what was in his bloodstream. Hae Young was in the study. He was seated when she entered, which she understood was a deliberate choice, seated rather than standing, behind a desk that he could have used as architecture to communicate the distance between his category and hers, and had apparently decided not to use that way. He looked better than he had at the harbor. The color was correct. The breathing was normal. The N-acetylcysteine had done its slow work over 72 hours, and his body had processed the remaining compound load with the assistance of the treatment protocol she had written out for his medical team on the back of Sung's notation sheet, in the vehicle, before they left the harbor. He gestured to the chair across from him. She sat. For a moment, neither of them said anything, which she was learning was characteristic of conversations with him. He did not fill silence reflexively, did not use it as a gap to be plastered over with social noise. He let it exist until something worth saying was ready to occupy it. The debt, he said, your mother's medical costs, your own educational debt, the amount you withdrew from the pre-med program owing. She had not told him the number. She understood, without needing confirmation, that he had found it through the same mechanisms by which his world found things it needed to know. I'm not looking for payment, she said. I know, he said. That's why I'm offering it. She held his gaze. He didn't give me a tip. He gave me my life back. Not the money, though the money was real, and the debt was real, and what it had cost her and her mother over the past 3 years was real in the way that only sustained financial pressure can be real, grinding and constant, and present in every decision large and small. Not just the money. The specific, irrevocable quality of what it means to have someone recognize the full weight of what you carried into a room and choose, without condition, to help you set it down. I didn't save you for compensation, she said. You saved me because you couldn't watch a man die, he said. I know that too. The debt clearance is not compensation. It is not a transaction. It is a correction, he said, of an imbalance that should not exist for a person with your capabilities operating in this city. She looked at the desk between them. She thought about the garnish station, about the lemon wedges cut too thick, about 3 years of correcting other people's oversights without being seen doing it, and the specific pharmacology notes running in the back of her mind while her hands moved through the work, and the 11 seconds of standing still at the garnish station while she ran the calculation that changed everything. What he was offering was not charity. She needed to understand that clearly, because charity would have felt wrong and she would have refused it, and they both knew she would have refused it. What he was offering was the correction of a systemic error, the specific error of a world that had looked at Sheila Adams and filed her in the wrong category for 3 years, and had nearly paid for that error with the life of the most powerful man in the city. She said, "There are conditions." He waited. "I finish," she said. "The degree. Full enrollment, not a reduced program, not an accelerated substitute. I finish what I started and I practice as a physician in the city, and I build whatever I build entirely from my own competence. The debt clearance is a floor, not a ceiling, and it is not attached to anything, not to this organization, not to you, not to any obligation I haven't explicitly agreed to." He looked at her for a long moment. "Done," he said. She nodded. "There is one more thing," he said. He opened a drawer and placed a folder on the desk between them and did not push it toward her, simply left it in the space where she could reach it or not reach it as she chose. Inside, her name. A consulting arrangement, formal, structured, with a defined scope and a compensation structure and the specific legal architecture of something built to last rather than something improvised. Medical advisory. Toxicological consultation. The particular expertise that had been present at a garnish station on a Tuesday evening and had turned out to be the most valuable thing in the building. "Not as the help," he said, "as a consultant, as someone this organization pays for what she knows, at the rate that knowledge is worth." She looked at the folder. She thought about Sung's saying, someone who sees everything and appears to be no one, the intentional point he had been making, the reflection she had not had time to sit with until now. She pulled the folder toward her. She did not open it yet. "You aren't a ghost anymore, Sheila," he said, and the words arrived the way the ones in the tunnel had arrived, without performance, without the careful management of their impact, simply as the true thing that needed to be said in the space between two people who had been through something that removed the available architecture for pretense. "You're the one who owns the house." She sat with that. The house was marble and morning light, and the memory of tunnels and a silver fork turning black and 47 seconds of her mother's voice, and a syringe full of saline and a document case, and a man at the harbor dock looking at water before he got in the vehicle. The house was what she knew, what she could see, what she had always been able to see, the shimmer of the wrong thing under the right light, the thing that was not what it was presenting itself as, the compound hiding in the coffee, the toxin in the glaze, the mole in the household, the gap in the plan. She had always been able to see it. She had simply, for 3 years, been seeing it in service of rooms that didn't know she was there. She opened the folder. Her mother was at the kitchen table when she got home, which was where her mother was at 4 in the afternoon on a day off, tea, a book with the spine carefully uncracked because her mother believed a book's spine was its dignity and treated it accordingly. The small radio on the counter playing something low that had been a kind of household sound for as long as Sheila could remember. The green cardigan, the third button, repaired. She had replaced it while Sheila was at the estate, a small pearl button that did not exactly match the others and therefore matched the cardigan perfectly. Her mother looked up. Sheila set the folder on the table. Her mother looked at it, looked at her. "Tell me," her mother said. So she told her, not the way she had told Kenji in the basement, clinically, structured, stripped of inference. The way she told her mother things, which was with the full texture of them, the garnish station and the 11 seconds and the lemon wedges cut too thick, and the tunnel and the star anise and the way Hae Young had said on my name in the dark like, it meant something indelible. Her mother listened the way she had always listened, without interrupting, without the reflexive reassurance that forecloses the thing being said, with the specific quality of attention that had made Sheila believe, from the time she was old enough to have things worth saying, that what she said was worth saying. When she finished, her mother was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at the folder. "Medical advisory," Sheila said, "and the debt, all of it." Her mother set her book down on the table, spine up, which was the only time she ever did that, when something required both hands, when something was important enough to risk the spine. She reached across the table and put both hands on Sheila's face the way she had done since Sheila was small, the full palm hold that communicated, without any ambiguity, the specific and total quality of being known by someone who has been paying attention to you for your entire life. "You were always going to be here," her mother said. "I just had to wait for you to see it." Sheila covered her mother's hands with her own. Outside, the city continued its afternoon. Traffic, wind, the ambient noise of a place that did not know what had run through its underbelly 6 days ago and would not know, because that was the nature of the work that kept it running. The invisible work. The infrastructure. The hands that cleared the plates and fixed the buttons and saw the shimmer in the garnish station light. The girl who saw the powder now sees the whole world differently. Not the world itself. The world was the same city it had always been, with the same ports and the same power and the same rooms full of people deciding, without evidence, what category to file the people around them into. What was different was Sheila's position in it. She was not background anymore. She was not the hand at the edge of the frame, the reflection in the polished tray, the server in the non-slip shoes that the room looked through on its way to something it considered more important. She was the one who had seen it coming. She was the one who had screamed. She was the one who had guided a king through tunnels built for the invisible, synthesized a temporary antidote from institutional supplies, switched a syringe in a compromised building, and stood in a decommissioned warehouse holding the documents that saved a city's ports while the firefight resolved itself around her. She was, by any accurate accounting of the evidence, the most important person in every room she had occupied for the past 6 days. She always had been. She just hadn't been the one holding the folder. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. You are exactly the kind of person I created this community for. Before you go, I need you to hear this. As a member of our Dora's Archives family, I want to make sure you don't leave today without checking this. If you are a United States citizen and groceries have been heavy on your budget, help may already be waiting for you right now. Here is what to do. Scan the QR code on your screen, click the link in the description, or go directly to Dora'sArchives.com. Answer a few simple questions, get instantly matched with benefits you qualify for, and start receiving monthly funds for groceries and essentials. And if you run into any challenges on the survey at all, please reach out to me in the comments or send me an email. I will personally help you get your benefits. Don't let this pass you by. Check today, not tomorrow. God bless you, and I will see you in the next story.